The hero fights the Demon King. The finale is an invulnerable hero. The castle is surrounded by purple crystals and purple lightning bolts. The sky above it is red. Siege of the Demon King's castle. A black dragon hits the ground with a purple laser from its mouth. On the ground, people in steel armor are fighting monsters. The horned werewolf bit the armored man's arm. A broken shield and sword lie next to the fallen soldier. The monster army let out a ferocious roar. Two soldiers stand with their backs to each other, surrounded by the battle. One of them shouts that they won't be able to hold them off for long and their attacks are too strong. Another replied that they could only pray that their hero had managed to defeat the Demon King. Glancing at the castle, the soldier wondered if he had been there all day and if he would be able to win. A girl with long brown eyes is lying on the floor. Her eyes snapped open. In a room with a cracked floor, the hero and the Demon King stand together. The Demon King told Yas that by killing him, he would finally be able to take over this land again and be the lord of the entire world. Frowning, Yasu replied that he wouldn't let him do that. Demon King Maliati grinned and told him to finish it. It's just colored, and there are red lines drawn on top of it. The red lines are signed. This thing adds electrical effects. Yasu answered him with a frown. His speech bubble is empty, and it is not colored. Blue lines are drawn on top of it. They are signed. Yasu's electrical effects are different from the Demon King's. The main character's name is Zhu Yingsu. He draws Yasya on a graphic tablet. He is 25 years old, single, and makes a living painting manhwa. Zhu Yingsu is shaking and crying while looking at the graphic tablet. He lost his job today. He remembered the man in the meeting shouting at him about his manhwa hero fighting the Demon King being read by fewer people every month. He shouted that the rating had dropped to 4.8, and the number of likes, comments, and bookmarks had also greatly decreased. The man told him to draw the last chapter and get out of here. The main character is sitting at a desk in a dark office. Sobbing, he said that they treated him like a puppy following orders, but one day he would make them regret it. He thought he would draw a comic book that would be amazing. It was raining outside the building, where one window was lit. Lightning erupted over the building. The lamp flickered with electricity and went out. Zhu Yingsu exclaimed that the building's lights were turned off and he didn't keep his job. He leaned back in his chair and thought about how even the gods were getting in his way. The screen of the graphics tablet lit up purple. The main character looked at him in surprise. Getting up from his chair, he looked at the lamp and thought it was strange. Stretching out his palm towards the graphics tablet, Zhu Yingsu wondered why his monitor was still lit up. Purple lightning bolts enveloped the tablet. Lightning filled the entire room, and the protagonist screamed for help and fright. The building's window glowed bright purple. The tablet screen went blank. The main character flew through the purple space that looked like space with a shout. The voice greeted him and introduced itself as Luna, caretaker of the borders of the manhwa world. Luna greeted him in the world of manhwa hero fights Demon King and said that the current rating is 4.8. Zhu Yingsu asked in surprise where this voice came from and who is the border guard. The voice announced the preparation of the guest's transformation and started counting down. After the countdown, the voice said that the transformation process had begun. The main character asked her what she was going to do with him. He looked down at his hands, which were shrouded in yellow flames. He looked down at himself in surprise and, exclaiming that he was on fire, shouted. The main character noticed something ahead. The voice announced that the transformation was complete and asked him to enjoy the journey. There was a bright white light in front of Zhu Yingsu. He asked to wait, asking where the exit was, and shouted. Shrouded in flames, he began to fall to the ground and asked what kind of place it was. In front of him was a landscape with mountains, villages, and a huge castle. The main character exclaimed that this was the Pant continent. He said that he had really entered the world of manhwa. Below him was a battlefield full of people and monsters. The soldier exclaimed that something was falling from the sky. The main character was falling towards the Demon King's castle, which was shrouded in purple lightning. The soldier exclaimed that it was heading straight for the Demon King's castle. Zhu Yingsu screamed loudly as he fell down. He fell into the castle with an explosion. Smoke was coming from the castle tower. Under the smoke, the silhouette of a man in armor could be seen. Sitting down, he said that he was in pain, and this is what he gets for not sleeping at night because of this manhwa. He asked me what the strange dream was. With a slight frown, he said that he was dreaming that he was in his own manhwa. He wondered if he should write a story about immersion in the game in the next part. Another armored man called out to him, and the protagonist turned around. Yasu frowned and asked how he, a second-class soldier, had broken through the Demon King's barrier and smashed the palace to pieces. The main character looked at himself in surprise and realized that he had turned into a character of his manhwa. As he got to his feet, he noticed that everything felt real and he wasn't sleeping. The Demon King in front of him held a sword that glowed purple in his hand. Zhu Yingsu thought about how he was very strong and was standing in front of him right now. Maliati, shrouded in purple energy, said that another bug had arrived from somewhere and he would deal with it now. The pink-haired girl behind him asked why he was frozen. Frowning, she asked if he could see that the hero was about to fight the Demon King. She shouted that if he stood between them, he was doomed to die. The girl shouted at him to get out of there quickly. Zhu Yingsu thought that Tia was actually very beautiful. He noticed what she said about the battle and realized that this was the place he had just drawn. Gritting his teeth, he thought that this meant that in a second, Moriarty would start attacking. The floor under the Demon King's foot cracked, and he leaped forward. Zhu Yingsu covered his face with his hands and screamed, telling him not to approach. Yasu took off and the Demon King's sword pierced through his body. The protagonist's eyes widened. Yasu was standing in front of him, blocking him out. Tia called out to Yasuya in a frightened voice with tears in her eyes. Moriarty drew his sword, and Yasu fell to the ground. The main character and Tia walked over to Yas, who was lying on the ground. Tia asked him why he had decided to save him. She asked who would defeat the Demon King if he died. The main character was surprised to think about what was going on here, and that this was not what he was going to draw at all. Yasu tearfully replied that he didn't know and that he couldn't move. He said that he felt that for Zhu Yingsu's sake, he had to go to any lengths, even death. Closing his eyes, he asked to protect this world. The main character called out to him with a frown. Numerous warning signs appeared in front of him. He wondered what they were warning him about. The voice said that the sudden death of the main male character Yasu led to a reduction in the rating to 3.4. The voice said that the rating fell below stable indicators, and the world of the hero fighting the Demon King will soon collapse. Through the hole in the tower, you can see the red sky with the moon. The Demon King ordered the whiting to stop. He said that Yasu died at his hands, and this can be said to be a contribution to the great king's reign. Tia said that he wasn't worthy of being the lord of the world. Moriarty asked if he was unworthy. He said that the fools who sealed him for 1,000 years had said the same thing, but now they were dead and he was still alive. Gritting his teeth, the protagonist frowned and thought that now was not the time to make him angry. Standing menacingly in front of them, Moriarty asked how they could stop him if the hero of this world was dead. He said this world would be his now. Tia tapped her staff on the floor and said that even though the hero was dead, her kingdom's army wouldn't give up so easily. Holding out a staff wrapped in blue energy, she frowned and told him not to even think about running the world. The Demon King raised his hand in front of him and said that they were hard to deal with. He waved his hand, and Tia was thrown to the side. She hit the wall and fell to the floor. Moriarty asked mockingly about her being the best magician in the world. He said that without a hero who dared to stand in front of him, even their spells were useless, and that was ridiculous. He said that he would deal with Zhu Yingsu first, then kill her, the queen, in front of her entire state. He added that its troops would disintegrate on their own. The Demon King glanced at the protagonist who was sitting next to Yasu's body. Looking at it, the protagonist thought that he couldn't move and wanted to escape, but he couldn't even get up. He thought that although there were many unpleasant places in his work and life, but he was born in a peaceful time, and he had never been in such dangerous situations. Remembering how he had drawn Moriarty, he thought that the person in front of him wanted to kill him, but he was just a character he had drawn. He wondered if he should be afraid of him. The Demon King swung his sword in front of him and shouted for him to die. His kick broke the floor, and the main character jumped out of the way. He fell to the ground, gritting his teeth, shrouded in purple electricity. Opening one eye, he thought he was in pain. Zhu Yingsu thought about how he had managed to evade it. The Demon King was standing in front of him, and the main character's foot was lying on the floor between them. Realizing that he had lost a leg, the protagonist screamed in pain. The Demon King walked up to him and grabbed his head with his hand. He said that he dodged his punch and asked how long his luck would be with him. The main character thought that this pain is real and he will not be able to escape. Tia, grimacing, shouted at him to stop and told him that he was just a simple soldier and there was no reason for him to kill him. After lifting the main character off the ground, the Demon King told him to die. Zhu Yingsu thought that next, Moriarty would definitely use the Demon King's sword to chop off his head. He thought that he was sure of this because he had personally prescribed his addictions. On the screen it says, character, violent, wayward, control freak. Addictions, likes to execute his victims by cutting off their heads. The Demon King struck the main character's neck with his sword. Zhu Yingsu blocked the blow with his sword. The place where the blades met glowed brightly with lightning. Tia was surprised to see that it was Yasu's sword and wondered when he had picked it up. The main character frowned, gritting his teeth, and thought that as soon as Moriarty chopped off his right leg, he was right next to Yasu's sword. Took advantage of the moment and grabbed it while Moriarty was lifting him off the ground, hiding the sword in the blind zone for Moriarty. The Demon King grinned and cursed. The main character noticed and surprised that Yasu's sword was cracked. He thought about how this was possible, since his description said that this sword and the Demon King's sword were equally strong. He assumed that he couldn't fully utilize the power of the sword because he was too weak. Grinning, Moriarty said that his luck was up. Nervously looking at the cracked sword, the protagonist realized that he had no idea what to do. He thought about how he didn't want to die. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he thought that in the real world, he was a nobody, and once in his own manhwa, he would let others control him again. Su Yingsu thought that he had created this world, and he was the author of Manhwa. With tears in his eyes, the main character shouted that he had created them all. The Demon King swung his sword. The main character fell to the ground. He noticed that it was fine and wondered why he didn't cut it up. Glancing at the Demon King, he noticed that he was disappearing. Moriarty asked what he had just said. He said that he shouted that he had created them and asked what it meant. He asked what he had done with it. As he disappeared, he shouted that it couldn't be, and there was no such power in this world. The Demon King shattered into small pieces. The main character opened his mouth in surprise. Tia screamed, and he turned toward her voice. She watched in horror as her body disappeared. She looked at Su Yingsu with tears in her eyes and asked him to save her. The main character called out her name tensely. He stretched out his hand, but it shattered into many pieces. Crouching down, he wondered what had happened. He noticed that not only Priyati and Chia were disappearing, but the dead Yasuo was also disappearing. Yasuo's body also shattered into many pieces. The Demon King's castle disappears. The main character thought about why this happened. He noticed a blue dialogue box in front of him that said, because the visitor said a forbidden phrase, indicated their identity, the rating of the comic was reduced to 0. The world of Manhwa is beginning to collapse. The island of land with the Demon King's castle crumbles into fragments. The dialogue boxes say, all characters, platforms, and settings will disappear in 1 minute. We ask all visitors to leave this place immediately. Su Yingsu thought about the words that he had revealed his identity and that the Manhwa world was about to disappear. He asked me to at least tell him how to leave this place. A blue button appeared in front of him, which says Ctrl+Q. Frowning, he thought that this was a combination for exiting the drawing program. He assumed that if he pressed this button, he would be able to exit the Manhwa world and return to the real world. The main character pressed the button with his index finger. When he clicked it again, he noticed that it didn't work, and nothing happens after clicking it. The dialog box announced the determination of the reason for the exit failure. The dialog box said, error number, GXJ3173, the user died in reality. Cause of death, electric shock. The dialog box showed Su Yingsu lying dead on the floor not far from the tablet glowing with purple electricity. Opening his eyes in shock, the main character said that this means that before entering Manhwa, he died from an electric shock. He asked me what he was now. Looking down at his hands, he saw that they were crumbling into small pieces. The main character realized that he, too, was beginning to disappear. He frowned. Su Yingsu shouted out what would happen to him after disappearing if he couldn't come out. On the blue dialog boxes, the word death was written in all languages of the world. Crouching down, he asked if there was no way to stop it. A red button appeared in front of him with the inscription, Ctrl+Z. The blue dialog boxes said that the destruction of the world has already entered the final phase, and there is no way to stop the process. The dialog box prompted him to click on a button to rewrite the author's fate. Su Yingsu looked at the button in surprise. The Demon King's castle slowly crumbled into pieces. The main character, sitting on the ground, asked what it means to rewrite fate. The dialog box says that this Manhwa world is 3 minutes away from disappearing, and if the visitor died in the real world and there is no way to exit, the soul will be destroyed. The dialog box says that if the soul dies, absolute death will occur. Trembling and frowning, the protagonist repeated the words, absolute death. A dialog box called for him to click on a button to reset all the content of the Manhwa Hero Fights the Demon King published by him in 2022 on the internet. The dialog box explained that in this way, the world can be revived, and his soul will temporarily escape the danger of absolute death. Frowning, Su Yingsu asked if he would go back to 2022 and redraw Manhwa. The dialog box replied that everything is correct, and the content of the Manhwa that the audience read in 2022 will be completely replaced with the version after the update. The main character asked if this was a rewriting of history. He said that if he redraws the already published Manhwa, he will make it even better. Opening his eyes in surprise, he said that this means that he will be able to change the rating of his comic. He thought that in reality, he had died from an electric shock just because his Manhwa rating was too low, and the boss had decided to fire him. If he still manages to raise the rating of the new comic, then this will not happen. The main character said in surprise that if he raised the rating, he would be able to resurrect. The dialog box replied that everything was correct, and if he didn't die in reality, he could click the exit button and return to the real world. The main character asked if everything could really work out. The dialog box replied that if the rating of the redrawn Manhwa was not much higher than the original version, it would not be possible to change fate and avoid death, and eventually absolute death would occur. Su Yingsu thought that it wouldn't be easy after all. Grimacing, he asked how he would know the ranking if he was currently inside the Manhwa world. The dialogue box replied that it will broadcast the entire situation with the updated manhwa in real time, including the rating, number of likes, subscriptions, bookmarks, and comments. It said that in this way, he will be able to determine the direction of the plot and adjust it at any time, and his life will depend on this comic. The dialogue box said that through the screen, he and the readers would have to complete the story together. It asked if he wanted to upgrade manhwa. Frowning, the protagonist replied that he wished to. He thought that he would definitely create a better manhwa and get out of here alive. He noticed that something else had appeared. Next to the reset button was written, the number of possible uses is 3. To reset manhwa, you need to spend all the accumulated likes of the first edition. He thought about the fact that this button can only be used 3 times, and that he didn't think that readers' likes could save someone's life. The dialogue box reported that the manhwa world was 5 seconds away from completely disappearing. Zhu Yingsu said that a mature author, despite all the storms and tribulations, should be calm and unruffled. The countdown to the disappearance of the manhwa world has begun. The main character waved his finger and thanked readers for likes, subscriptions, and bookmarks. He pressed the reset button. Darkness enveloped everything. The main world is being updated. The update is complete. Stabilization of the main world. Stabilization is complete. The rating of manhwa returned to the initial indicator of 5.0. A state of stability was achieved. The login process begins. The loading scale gradually filled up to 100%. The update is complete. The voice called out to Yasya. A voice called out to Zhu Yingsu, telling him to wake up quickly. He opened his eyes, dressed in ragged rags and a steel collar with a chain. Remembering how his leg had been chopped off, he looked down and found that his leg was still there. An elderly man with a mustache said he finally woke up and scared him. He asked why he suddenly fainted if he was fine. He said he thought he was dying. The main character recognized Uncle Ben, a character from the extras of his comic book. He realized that this was a scene from the first chapter of his manhwa in which Yasuo was still a slave and was digging a mine with magic minerals. People in chains extract minerals with a pickaxe. One of them greeted a man with purple hair, accompanied by 2 armored men. Zhu Yingsu thought that after resetting manhwa, he didn't need to redraw it again, and now he was a participant in it himself. He thought about how he was a slave now, just like Yasuo. Lisai, the slave owner, called out to the 2 slaves and asked them who allowed them to relax and if they wanted to die. Uncle Ben came up to him apologetically and said that Zhu Yingsu had just fainted. Lisai, hands clasped behind his back, replied that since he had fainted, there was nothing to be done. Uncle Ben was glad that he understood. Lisai punched him in the face and shouted that he had only seen 2 slaves with their eyes open, slacking off from their work. Uncle Ben fell to the ground. Lisai happily said that now the slave actually fainted. With a frown, the protagonist called out to Uncle Ben. Lisai told them that they had to do twice as much work today. Glaring menacingly at the protagonist, he said that their working day would only end when they handed over the minerals for 4 people. Otherwise, he would chop off their hands and then give them to the wild beasts to eat. Frowning, the protagonist obeyed and thought about how, let alone raising the manhwa ranking, he couldn't even think of a way to get out of this cave alive. While extracting minerals with a pickaxe, Zhu Yingsu thought that he had become a slave to the character that he had drawn himself. He asked if there were any more unhappy authors in the world than he was. Uncle Ben is chewing on a loaf of bread. Sitting on the ground near the wall, he said to the main character he dragged him into this, but when he comes to his senses, he will definitely help him. Zhu Yingsu turned around and said that it was fine and told him to rest. He thought that everything was not normal because he used to sit in front of the computer for 10 hours every day, had a sedentary lifestyle, and now suddenly he has to mine ore and it's too difficult for him. He added that his lower back hurts. As he continued to mine for minerals, he asked Uncle Ben if he knew where Yasuo was. He asked if there was a person with that name in their mine. Opening his eyes in surprise, he asked about the fact that he didn't know Yasuo. Zhu Yingsu thought, how can this be, since Yasuo is the main character and everyone here should know him, especially since he grew up in front of Uncle Ben. A blue dialog box announced the launch of the system search function. After announcing that the search was complete, it reported that there was no character named Yasuo in the world of this manhwa, and the name of the main character was Zhu Yingsu. The main character frowned in surprise. He asked if it was a joke. He said that it would be a disaster for him to become the main character instead of Yasuo. He thought of the Demon King's castle crumbling to pieces. Covering his mouth with his hand, he thought that he couldn't reveal his identity because it was forbidden, otherwise the rating would be reset again and the world would collapse. Looking at Zhu Yingsu fussily waving his head and muttering, Uncle Ben thought that he had become somewhat strange after fainting. Turning around, the protagonist thought about how Uncle Ben didn't see the pop-up window, and for him, he was just talking to the air. He assumed he thought he was sick. The dialog box reported that it could see or hear his inner voice. Pointing to a black window with white edges, the protagonist mentally asked if his thoughts were written on it. The dialog box responded that it did. Zhu Yingsu thought with a disappointed face that he was in Manhwa after all. He noticed that the wall in front of him was covered with purple cracks. Uncle Ben asked what was going on. The wall in front of the main character exploded. Uncle Ben said in surprise that there were too many strange things going on today. The main character stared ahead, his mouth hanging open in silence. There was a huge pit in front of him. He realized that it was a pit that appeared after the earthquake in the first version of the plot. Ona thought that Yasuo had accidentally fallen into it and awakened his powers, and from there he began his perilous journey from slave to hero. Frowning, Zhu Yingsu wondered why she had appeared now since there was no earthquake. He assumed that because his behavior was different from Yasuo's, there was a change in the timeline and Yama appeared earlier. He noticed a blue dialogue box. On it, it was written that each of his actions affects the plot or changes it. Moreover, it affects the rating of Manhwa. The dialogue box asked him to think carefully about his next actions. With a determined frown, the protagonist thought that since he was now the main character, everything that was happening to him now was a repetition of the plot of the first chapter, and the beginning of the work would determine whether people would continue to read it, and this was vital for him. He figured that if you didn't get your readers involved quickly, they could easily flip through this page in a few seconds. He imagined a reader quickly flipping through a Manhwa list. Zhu Yingsu thought that he should make the plot more exciting. He told Uncle Ben that he wanted to go down there for a while. He asked if he could cover it. Uncle Ben shouted at him not to do anything stupid. The main character replied with a serious face that he had a good reason to jump there, even though he couldn't explain anything to him. He said if he didn't come back in half a day, tell everyone that he was dead. He added that if he succeeded, they would never work here again. Trembling, Uncle Ben asked what kind of nonsense he was talking and said that he was crazy. Zhu Yingsu kicked off the ground and jumped into the pit. He thought about how the author had become the main character. As he fell into the pit, he thought that if he could raise the rating, he would have life waiting for him, and if he couldn't, he would have death waiting for him. Frowning, he falls down, thinking that this is exciting. Yasuo floats in a dark space. He frowned and made a sound without opening his eyes. Underground magic mine, deserted area. There are many sharp magic minerals at the bottom of the pit. The main character continues to fall deeper into the mine. The main character swims in the slime, taking air in his mouth. He was glad that the slime that saved Yasuo's life was still here. He thought that he knew it would be like this, but he still almost fainted from fear. Zhu Yingsu thought that this thing would spit him out now. Spilling the slime, the monster spat out the main character into the wall. Getting up from the ground, the main character thought it was too sticky. The slime slithered away irritably. Zhu Yingsu noticed his pickaxe in front of him. He assumed that she had fallen with him. As he picked up the pickaxe, he thought that he couldn't have collected so many magic minerals with his bare hands. The passage in front of him was full of huge magic minerals. Magic minerals are one of the most important resources in this world. The magical energy stored inside them can charge magical mechanisms, just like fuel in the real world. They can also provide the mage with the energy base to use magic. They can even be used as a currency. The more noble a person is, the more magic minerals they have. In a month, the Demon King Maliati will completely break the seal and rule the land. If Zhu Yingsu could prepare more minerals now, it would be easier for him to deal with future problems. The main character stands surrounded by minerals, holding his lower back. Behind the minerals, several monsters were watching him. Frowning, the protagonist turned around. The monsters attacked him, and the protagonist exclaimed that they were scavengers. He thought about how these three scavengers were the first monsters that Yasuo had killed in the first version of Manhwa. As he ran away, Zhu Yingsu turned around and thought that these creatures only ate rot, and Yasuo was only able to defeat them thanks to the brute strength he had gained from decades spent in the mine. He thought about Yasuo's muscles, comparing them to his own, and frowned in frustration. He thought that he was just a weak Manhwa rider, and if he died at the hands of scavengers, it would just be the stupidest end, and he had better stay away from them. Scavenger paw hit the main character in the back. His punch left 3 huge cuts on his back, and he screamed in pain. He fell to the ground. Gritting his teeth, he cursed. Zhu Yingsu thought that they were faster than he expected. He thought that he couldn't let them capture him, otherwise they would kill him, and when his body decomposed, they would devour him. The scavengers were standing in front of him, baring their huge teeth. They opened their drooling mouths viciously. The main character frowned and thought that it would not be so easy for them. He threw 3 white balls at them. The scavengers looked up in surprise. Zhu Yingsu thought that as an author, he knew more about the scavengers' secrets than Yasuo. The scavenger was shrouded in flames. The main character thought that they seem invincible, but they have something to be afraid of. He charged, shouting loudly and swinging his pickaxe. He stabs the scavenger in the chest with a pickaxe. Leaping forward, he was caught between 2 scavengers. Glancing at one of them, he asked if they wanted to eat it. Scavenger shook his head in panic. The main character stood surrounded by fallen scavengers. Breathing heavily, he thought it was fresh food. There was a loaf of bread sticking out of his pocket, and he thought that even a small piece of bread would break their throats. Zhu Yingsu looked at the red dialogue box in front of him in surprise. On it was written, attribute points obtained, 6. Instant kill bonus points, 3. Total points, 9. Please distribute them. The status window read, Zhu Yingsu, slave. Power, -1. Magic, 0. Stamina, 1. Agility, 1. Insight, 2. Number of unallocated points, 9. The main character was happy and said that he finally had a hero panel like Yasu and now he can become stronger. When he saw the negative value of his power, he frowned in displeasure. A blue dialog box appeared above the status window and said, low-level system detected. The takeover process is underway. The main character asked what it was going to do. The dialog box says, the takeover is complete, the system is being updated. Completed, please use the pro version of the hero panel. The status window turned blue. The dialog box asked to say add power points. Zhu Yingsu noticed that it had become even smarter and Yishu had to do it all by hand. He called the receptionist. The blue dialog box responded. He said, power +4. Picking up the pickaxe, he exclaimed that the pickaxe that he had barely been able to lift was now as light as a feather. Looking to the side, he said, dexterity +4. The administrator agreed. The main character exclaimed that now the scavengers will definitely not catch up with him. The dialog box reported that he had one unused point. Frowning, Zhu Yingsu thought that the most important thing was to increase strength and agility and said to invest this point in magic. The dialog box announced that adding points was completed. Noticing a sharp change in himself, the main character thought that the value of magic in the range between 0 and 1 is a very important point, and this means that from an ordinary person he turned into a real magician. The administrator said that everything is correct. The main character thought that now you need to collect magic minerals. He asked the administrator to activate the hero backpack feature. A blue backpack appeared in front of him, and a dialog box announced that the backpack feature was activated. The main character shouted that he wanted to dig deep. He was crouched among the minerals. Quickly running along the magic minerals, he smashed and lifted them into the air. The dialog box reported that all resources are collected automatically. The shards of magic minerals went into the blue backpack. The dialog box reported that 10 tons of high-precision minerals have been accumulated, and the amount continues to increase. Exhaling heavily, Zhu Yingsu thought that he was tired. The dialog box reported that 25 tons of high-precision minerals had been collected. The main character was glad that there is such a convenient function, and asked if he was too greedy because Yasu took only 1 ton. Turning around, he noticed that there were magic minerals everywhere just now, but it wasn't so bright here. Noticing the thin layer of blue energy, he assumed it was a magical barrier. The dialog box reported that this barrier was installed by Zhu Yingsu on March 29, 2022. The main character noticed that it used a date from the real world and thought that he did not remember putting up any barrier in this place. He asked if it could be removed. The dialog box replied that the owner of the barrier can easily remove it. It announced that the barrier had been lifted. The blue barrier disappeared. Zhu Yingsu walked forward and said that there was nothing special here. He looked away, frowning. In front of him was a huge monster that let out a loud roar. Trembling with fear, he realized that it was the Underground King and said that it couldn't be because he couldn't think of a way for Yasu to defeat him, so he cut out the original version and threw it in the trash. The blue dialog box says, a character drawn by the author in real life, but not suitable, cannot completely disappear. It is placed in a magic barrier and is trapped there. Zhu Yingsu was surprised when he recalled drawing the Underground King and asked about the fact that an unusable character couldn't disappear. The dialog box says, secret mission received, kill the Underground King. Standing in front of the Underground King, the protagonist asked if this was a joke. He said that this must be a mistake, because at this level, the main character can't kill such a creature. The dialog box says, this is the climax of the story. If the hero refuses the task, with a high probability, the rating of Manhwa will greatly decrease. Zhu Yingsu gritted his teeth in surprise and recalled the dialog boxes labeled death. The Underground King let out a loud growl as he stretched out a paw. The main character dodged with a jump, and the monster's paw hit the ground. The crystal on the Underground King's head glowed bright red. The main character looked at him in fright. He remembered creating this monster. He said that he was just a killer because he was not only incredibly strong, but also very agile. He said that the most powerful thing is the horn on his head, which can shoot high-energy magic beams. Laughing, he said that it would be hard for Yasu to deal with him. The main character thought that he hated himself. The Underground King shot out a huge red beam. The cave in front of him exploded. It is shrouded in flames. The Underground King looks around the burning cave. The main character came out of the ground. When the monster saw him, it reached out and grabbed him. The main character screamed in fear. The Underground King squeezed it in his hand. Zhu Yingsu screamed loudly in pain, his eyes bulging. He realized that his ribs were broken. Looking at the Underground King, he wondered if he was mocking him, and taking revenge on him for being the author because he made it up and then removed it and locked it in this place. The protagonist's eyes rolled back in his head and he thought that he was dying. He turned to the administrator and shouted that he wanted to use the cancellation to restart Manhwa. The dialogue box reported that the current number of likes is 20 and the conditions for triggering cancellation were not met. The main character swore. The underground king raised his other hand over him. Zhu Yingsu stared in horror at the huge claw approaching. He thought about how he was about to crush it and how he was just a hero in the initial stage who had only killed 3 scavengers. Closing his eyes, he thought that he didn't have any special items or companions, and with his current strength level, there was no way he could get out of the monster's clutches. He wondered what he should do and if he had anything. His inventory appeared on the dialogue box, and the dialogue box reported that his dashboard was open. The protagonist's eyes flew open, and when he saw the magic minerals in his inventory, he thought that he had a way. Closing one eye, he shouted at the administrator to throw all 25 tons of magic crystals at the underground king. The blue backpack soared into the air, and a dialogue box announced that the magic minerals had been discarded. Purple crystals rained down from the backpack towards the underground king. He opened his hand, and the protagonist, looking down, thought that if he fell like this, he would break, and this time the slime would not catch him. He thought that even though he only had 5 dexterity, if he concentrated all of it on his legs, he might be able to do it. Kicking off the falling crystal with his feet, he leaped forward. Kicking off the crystals, he landed on the ground. The dialogue box announced that all the minerals had been emptied. In front of Zhu Yingsu was a huge mountain of purple minerals. Sitting up, he looked ahead, wondering if he had killed him. He realized that he hadn't killed her because there was no notification from the system. After scattering the minerals, the underground king straightened up, growling loudly. Trembling, the main character looked at him in fright and said that he was finished. The monster glared at him. In the mine, a voice shouts for the old man to confess. Uncle Ben is chained to a wooden pole. Licky told him that if one didn't tell him where Zhu Yingsu was, he would kill him. Uncle Ben thought that he couldn't tell them where he was because if they filled up the hole, he would never be able to get out. He spat and told him to go to away. Lisai was furiously silent. He pressed his palm to his chest, and Uncle Ben asked what he was doing. Purple electricity surrounded them. Uncle Ben, who was twitching convulsively from the electricity, said that he would tell you everything. Lisai told him to speak while removing his hand that was shrouded in electricity. Uncle Ben, with a tired face covered in tears, replied that he would say that his hair looked disgusting. Lisai frowned furiously. He swung his electricity-shrouded fist and told him to die. He punched out, but the hand caught him. Licky and Uncle Ben opened their eyes in surprise. Zhu Yingsu stood between them. He apologized for coming too late. Lisai said he was a good boy because he had come back to him. He asked if he was ready to chop off his hands and feed them to the monsters. With an awkward grin, the protagonist said that he wasn't ready. He thought that he was really a fool, and the original readers had already discussed him. He remembered the comment that said Lisai was a fool. Zhu Yingsu thought about how he could now see that they were right in their harsh remarks. Licky held up a hand with a magic seal in front of it and said that it would be an honor for Zhu Yingsu to die at his hands. The main character in his thoughts asked him to stop repeating this because readers will mock him again. Lisai ordered the slave to be chained up. The main character was wrapped in chains. Uncle Ben cursed in fright. Lisai was holding a chain in his hand that wrapped around the main character. He asked if he knew why he wanted to learn the magic of electricity. He said it was because it was most suitable for chained slaves. His hand glowed with purple energy and he sent a current through the circuit. A discharge of electricity hit the main character. Uncle Ben called out his name. In a cloud of dust, you can see the silhouette of the main character. He said it scared him. Lisai tugged on the chain, startled, asking how this was possible. The main character opened his mouth in surprise and thought that he just wanted to try, but he never expected that after defeating the Dungeon King, he would become so strong. The Dungeon King let out a loud roar. Zhu Yingsu started to run away from him, and he slammed his hand on the ground. Running away, the main character thought that he had nothing left. He turned around and saw that the Dungeon King had leapt at him to attack. He fell to the ground, breaking the floor beneath him. The main character was thrown aside by the shock wave. As he landed on his feet, he thought that it was already a miracle that he had escaped its grasp, and now he had no solutions at all. He thought about how he had thought that before, and sometimes people don't realize the power they have and think they can't do anything. The dialogue box asked if it wanted to open a status window. The main character replied that he didn't mean it that way, but the status window was already open in front of his face. Glancing to the side, he noticed the Dungeon King's paw approaching. He jumped on it and ran up it. He thought about how he had purposely invested 1 point in magic before, and even though it was only 1 point, it would be enough. In this manhwa, in order to use most magic spells, you only need 2 things, sufficient magic power and a spell. As an author, Zhu Yingsu knows every spell in this world because he made them all up. He thought about the fact that there was one spell that would be enough for one magic point, and that was the explosion spell. Pushing off, the main character jumped up. He slammed the pickaxe into the wall and hung on, thinking that this position should work. He shouted that he would fight to the end. The Dungeon King opened its mouth and extended its hand towards him. The main character, holding a magic mineral in his hands, shouted, "Fukai Ruota." He threw a crystal glowing with purple energy down. The Dungeon King looked at the approaching crystal. The crystal fell at his feet. It began to glow brightly with purple energy, and the main character thought that blowing up 25 tons of magic minerals in an instant is a real luxury. There was a big explosion. A dialogue box announced that the mission to kill the Underground King had been completed. The dialogue boxes read, 50 points received. Received a special reward, wound repair, 1 time. Zhu Yingxu, wrapped in purple energy, thought that he was already stronger than Yasuo, who had only managed to kill 3 scavengers by now, and that was more than being a little stronger. He thought that Yasuo had been fighting a desperate battle with Lisai, and it would be a piece of cake for him. He calmly opened his eyes. The chains that bound him broke apart. The fingers on Lisha's hand were broken, and he screamed in pain. Eyes bulging, he shouted about how he dared to harm him, and repeated that he would kill him. He saw a fist approaching. Zhu Yingxu slapped him across the face, sending him flying backwards. He crashed into the wall with a crash. The main character with a calm face thought about him talking less, because it would be bad if it affected the rating. Uncle Ben opened his mouth in surprise, thinking about how he was able to defeat Li Qi and his soldiers in one blow. Li Qi and his soldiers were lying on the ground. A steel collar with a chain once again appeared on the main character's neck. With a chuckle, Lisai said that as long as there was a slave contract, no matter where he got his strength or how strong he became, the chain would follow him like a shadow. Lisai laughed madly and shouted that he would always be his slave. The main character paused and left. Lisai asked where he was going. The main character stood in front of a stone wall. Lisai asked why he was standing there. Zhu Yingxu smashed the wall in front of him. Licky asked in surprise how he knew where he had hidden all the contracts. The main character thought that he knew because he was the author. He said he hid it at random. He thought that Lisai should be grateful to him because Yasuo tortured him for a long time before he finally told him where he kept the contracts. He tossed the burning torch into the pile of contracts. Standing with his back to the fire, he shouted to everyone that the slave contracts had been destroyed. He smiled and shouted that they were free from slavery. People cheered and thanked him. The collar on the protagonist's neck opened and his shackles fell to the ground. He thought about how, after destroying the contracts, the magic-enhanced shackles were automatically unlocked. They decided to build a village nearby after leaving the mine, and Lisai and his subordinates would most likely be the main labor force in building the village. Uncle Ben was chosen as the head of the village. As he neared the exit of the mine, the protagonist thought that in the original version, Yasuo led a group of people in a rebellion against Lisha, and even though they won, they still lost a lot of people. He wondered if he'd done better. Shielding himself from the bright light with his hand, Zhu Yingxu said that they finally saw the sunlight. Above the ravine, a ship hovered in the air, chained to the ground. The protagonist thought about how they had a month before the Demon King broke the seal and brought an endless war with him to this land. Whether it was Yasuo or other countries, they were all caught off guard, and since Zhu Yingxu knows that this is going to happen, he can't just sit back and wait for it to happen. He thought about the fact that this world wasn't identical to the one he had drawn, and hasty actions could lead to death. He decided that he should first understand his own abilities. He asked the administrator to open the status window. A status window appeared in front of him. The main character thought about how he got 50 points for defeating the Dungeon King, spent 30 points to strengthen and left 20 points for an emergency. But there's still too little information here. He noticed a page switching feature. He thought that he hadn't noticed it before, and it should have appeared after the administrator took control of the stat points panel. The main character asked him to switch to the next page. On the dialogue box in front of him were 2 Manhwa chapters. Zhu Yingxu thought that he had been through a lot. He only got 2 chapters of Manhwa out of it. He noticed that the second chapter received a lot more likes and subscriptions than the first. The receptionist said that it was because he defeated an underground king that the original protagonist didn't stand a chance against, and gained the reader's respect. He asked him to keep working hard. The protagonist thought about how he didn't expect that the abandoned drafts would help him gain the reader's approval, and even though he almost lost his life, he now regained the confidence to make this Manhwa better. The dialogue box says, "These values are very important for the author's development. Please take a look at the author's skill list." The main character wondered if there was such a thing. A dialogue box with skills appeared in front of him. It said that the number of favorites is used to unlock skills, and the number of likes is used to activate skills. Zhu Yingxu thought about how exiting and canceling were the author's skills. He thought about how he could unlock more of the author's skills if the number of favorites increased, and if he could unlock all of them, he would be invincible. Looking into the distance, the protagonist thought that in 2 days there would be a conscription ceremony, and those who wanted to join the army could go to the Feng Kingdom on a special magic airship that would be at the port of Merdai. He thought that Yasuo was just one of those people, and he should also enter the troops in this way because that's where he can meet his main character, Princess Tia. Princess Tia stood on the high ground of the arena looking at the units of her army. The main character thought that the support of Princess Tia and the country of Feng is the key to continuing the plot. With a frown on his face, he thought that Tia at the beginning of Manhwa and at the end were two different people since she hadn't turned into a pure-hearted princess yet and it would be difficult to get her support. Zhu Yingsu thought that he was not the same as the original Yasuo. After all, the reward he received for killing the underground king allowed him to improve his stats and skills. He thought that everything was very different, abilities and actions included. Instead of waiting for the demon king to arrive, he decided to take the initiative and kill him before he broke the seal. Frowning confidently, the protagonist wondered what would become of the Manhwa world that had lost its final boss. He thought that he was looking forward to it. At the same time, in the Feng country palace, the voice said that Prince Luozi, Prince Katie, and Princess Tia were requesting an audience. The man sitting on the throne agreed. Ertai Gadi, the king of Feng country, said that there will be an army entry ceremony in 2 days and one member of the royal family is missing. He asked them who would go. The guy in armor with his long hair pulled back in a ponytail, the prince of Feng country, Luozi, the older brother of Princess Tia, said that tomorrow he would have to lead the army and go to the southeast to destroy the evil spirits, and he would not be able to go without a ceremony. The guy with the short hair, the prince of Feng country, Katie, Princess Tia's younger brother, said that the workshop on magic mechanisms that they organized together with the Zhengqi state will be held tomorrow, and he won't be able to either. He said to give their sister the opportunity to participate in the ceremony because she has a lot of free time. He added that she is getting married soon, and she needs to appear more in public, and maybe she can get more support. Tia glared at him and said that no one would think he was mute if he talked less. Katie grinned back. Tia stepped forward and said with a frown that she was refusing to take part in the ceremony. In a month, the demon king Maliati will break the seal and bring endless war to this land. All the evil spirits of the world felt this and became incredibly aggressive. There have been numerous cases of demons attacking humans in recent years. In the land of Feng, where they had no idea what the purpose of the monsters' rebellion was, they defined the degree of danger of these incidents as a catastrophe. The king of Feng country issued a decree to attract volunteers from all over the country to resist the disaster. Zhu Yingsu had just taken the opportunity to approach the royal family. The main character, dressed in armor, stands in the ranks of soldiers. The man on the ship shouted, "Disaster." A large man with a mustache and wearing armor, Fu Lesi, a mid-ranking commander, said that this was a deadly danger for a huge number of people and a great chance for them. He shouted that they should be proud of it, otherwise, people like them, mud-born people, would never be able to get a chance to enter the Feng kingdom. Frowning, the main character thought that in the original plot, Fu Lexi was a scheming conspirator who didn't put human life in any way, and if someone didn't obey his orders, they would surely die. He thought that because Yasuo had accidentally angered him, he had almost been beheaded by Yasuo at the military enlistment ceremony. Zhu Yingsu thought that he couldn't be as rash as Yasuo and should definitely take matters into his own hands and turn the plot to his advantage. Frowning, he thought about how he would then take the initiative and defeat him at the recruitment ceremony, gaining Tia's attention, and then he would have a chance to get closer to the royal family. Fu Lesi shouted for those who weren't afraid of death to get on the ship. The soldiers raised their fists. The loudspeaker announced that there were 10 seconds left before the ship took off and started counting down. The countdown ended and the ship soared into the sky. The ship is flying through the clouds. Looking out the window, the main character thought that even though he was the author, he was still very shocked by what was happening, because he was really flying on the ship that he drew towards the Feng kingdom. A man in armor entered the door and shouted to listen to him. He said they had too many recruits this time and they were too difficult to manage. He said that they will divide everyone into groups of 4 people and choose one commander, and the commander will report on the situation in each group to his superiors. The soldiers obeyed. Looking at the papers, the man asked the main character if he was Zhu Yingsu. The main character replied that it was so. The guy with the dark hair and goatee said he was a member of his group from now on, and they were going to have a group meeting. He called out to him. Frowning, the protagonist agreed and thought about how he understood some of the rules. He thought that when he makes the same decisions as Yasuo, even if it seems random, the events remain the same as in the original plot, and he boarded the ship at the same time as Yasuo and was assigned to the same group as him. Zhu Yingsu thought that this way, he could confidently control the part of the plot that coincided with the original and correct the not-so-good parts over time. A dark-haired guy with a grim grin said that from now on, as members of his team, he hoped they could show off their skills. He said that if they wanted to say something, they'd better keep their mouths shut and then everything would be fine between them. The main character, frowning, thought that he did not need to tell who they are because he invented them. He thought that these guys were originally robbers of magic minerals, and now they joined the military service only to steal these very minerals. He thought that they did not expect that they would immediately be separated, and when they met Yas, they were generally afraid that he would talk a lot and therefore began to intimidate them. Zhu Yingsu thought about how Yasu refused to obey and fought them, and when Fu Lesi found out about this incident, Yasu was recognized as an accomplice of the robbers, after which they were punished and forced to fight to the death during the entry ceremony. Yasu won, but because of his kind nature, he chose not to kill them, and this angered Fu Lexi. He climbed up on the stage and killed 3 people in seconds, preparing to kill Yasu who disobeyed him, and although Yasu managed to dodge the blows, he was no match for him at all. If Tia hadn't intervened, Yasu would have definitely died. Tia frowned and ordered Fu Lexi to stop. The main character thought that if he wanted to use Fu Lei's to get closer to the royal family, then he needed to approach every step of his life with careful caution. First of all, he is not allowed to do the same as Yasu in the original story and fight with these 3 during the service entry ceremony. Instead, he decided to save his strength to face Fu Lexi. He remembered the comments that said, "He hesitates to kill, too holy." The main character was able to survive only thanks to the main character, well, garbage. He lost to the commander again. I won't read this anymore. Zhu Yingsu thought about what he hadn't realized before until he saw such comments, that readers were very fond of beautiful and capable protagonists, and this time, he should rely on his abilities to create an interesting story. A dialogue box announced that he had received a limited time task, become the boss of these 3. The main character calmly glanced at the dialogue box and thought that this was what he needed. Glancing at the dialogue box, he noticed that there was something written on it in small print. Failure to complete the task would result in a lower Manhwa rating. Swearing at the administrator, the main character thought that 10 seconds is too short. A guy with dark hair shouted that he was talking to him and asked why he was looking around. The countdown dialogue box. Zhu Yingsu panicked and shouted if he could be in charge. He added that he will do whatever they say. The boys looked at each other in disbelief, saying that they didn't understand what he was talking about. Frowning, the protagonist thought that he didn't have time and would have to solve this problem by force, and he would think about the rest after completing the task. He charged, swinging his fist, and shouted that he was begging them to let him be in charge. The boys exclaimed irritably that this didn't sound like a request. With his kick, he threw them into the air. Opening his mouth in surprise, the protagonist thought that he had forgotten that they were in the sky. The guys fell over the side of the ship. The main character grabbed the hand of the guy with dark hair, and the others grabbed each other. Closing his eye tightly, Zhu Yingsu thought that if they fell, then it would all be over. A guy with dark hair with tears in his eyes frowned and shouted at him not to let go and pick them up. He shouted that they would do whatever he said. The main character shouted at him to call him boss. The boys shouted, "Boss." The dialogue box announced that the task was completed. On the dialogue box as it was written, received 10 points. Received 13 reader likes. The loudspeaker announced that they would be arriving in the Feng Kingdom soon. The voice ordered them to leave the cabin in their own groups and go on deck. The main character was sitting on the floor, surrounded by guys. One of them admired the fact that he would do anything for the sake of power. Zhu Yingsu replied with a grim face that he had had a dream of becoming someone powerful since childhood. The guy replied that this punch was very convincing, and now they, the 3 Maki brothers, will follow him. Fu Lexi was standing in front of him, asking if someone could explain to him what had happened. The main character's fist mark was visible on the guy's armor. Fu Lexi said that it seemed that someone on the ship was restless. The main character thought that at this rate they would be punished by the 4 of them, and he would be able to change the plot. He held up his hand, saying it was him. The guys jumped up from their seats, shouting that the 3 of them had fought, and the main character had nothing to do with it. Opening his mouth in surprise, Zhu Yingsu wondered why they were taking the blame, since it was tantamount to suicide. He remembered that he had attributed the trait that they became Yasu's opponents only because they were on opposite sides, but now he was their boss. Fu Lexi grinned viciously and said that there was a tradition for recruits to fight each other at the enlistment ceremony, and he was worried that he didn't have any candidates this year. However, since they liked to fight so much, they might fight each other to the death at the ceremony. The main character thought that now the situation has nothing to do with him, and he cannot allow the story to develop in this direction. Thinking that he needed to do something, he swung his fist. Fu Lexi caught his fist with his hand. Frowning, he said that he never asked the reasons of a person who was seeking his own death and only granted their wish. He asked how he wanted to die, to be hung upside down from a wall, to be burned to death by the sun, or to be beheaded in public. Zhu Yingsu frowned, glad in his mind that he had caught his attention. He said he had heard about his reputation and asked if he could challenge him to a duel at this year's induction ceremony. He said that if he could choose how to die, he would like to die on stage. The Mac brothers opened their mouths in shock, asking if he was crazy to challenge the general. Fu Leixi, wrapped in a red aura, said that he was interesting, and he had never thought of killing someone in front of the entire country and the royal family at the service entry ceremony. Agreeing, he said that he would appear before the public in all its glory in a wedding suit made from his corpse. Frowning, the protagonist smirked and thought that he had taken the bait. The Kingdom of Feng. On the purple screen above the city, a man with a mustache and glasses was visible. The voice greeted the people of the Feng Kingdom. He introduced himself as Zhu Bof, the royal caretaker, and said that he would like to remind everyone that the enlistment ceremony was about to begin and invited everyone to watch. He said that members of the royal family will also attend. A voice in the crowd asked which royal family member they thought would be coming. Laughing, the crowd said that it was obvious that that stupid princess had come. Feng Kingdom Arena, the gathering place for the ceremony. The arena was a huge circular structure without a roof. Frowning, Zhu Yingsu thought that he was far inferior to Fu Leixi in strength, which meant that it would not be easy to defeat him and he would have to be cunning. He thought that he was just a man who a character right now and couldn't guarantee that the situation would be 100% under his control. However, he had no other choice. The voice announced the start of the induction ceremony and called for a welcome to Princess Tia, who is presenting the royal family with her speech. Frowning, she said that the recent demon rampage had really scared the people of this continent, and her father was constantly thinking about how to stop it, which was why they were so actively recruiting people this time. Looking at her, the main character thought that he finally saw her. Tia said that, to their relief, many warriors responded to the summons. Recalling how her body had shattered into small pieces, Zhu Yingsu thought that this time, he wouldn't allow something like this to happen to her again. Tia said that their participation made a great contribution to the strength of their kingdom's army. She thought about how she was determined not to come here. She remembered telling the king that she refused to come to the ceremony. The king replied that her brothers had much more important things to do, and they didn't have time to distract themselves from them. He said it was her duty as a princess to attend the ceremony. Frowning, she started to protest, but the king cut her off, forbidding her to object. He told her to leave. Tia slammed the door behind her. She thought that neither her father, Katie, nor Lozi understood. She recalled the words of others that she was a nobody without her status and appearance, that her brothers were so good that she seemed like an extra, and that she was very lucky to have status and wealth, being a beautiful dummy. She remembered the voice saying that it thought she heard them. Another voice answered, asking, "So what?" The voice asked if he wasn't complimenting her on how lucky she was. Another voice said that she was in such a good position that they would stop calling her a dummy as soon as she tried to do anything. Tia thought about how no one would even see her attempt. She recalled the words that they would definitely win because Prince Luozi was leading their fight, that Prince Luozi was the best, and that he was the guardian angel of the Feng Kingdom. She also remembered the words that Prince Katie was a genius, that he had invented an incredible magical device as a child, that he had found the perfect solution to the northern food problem, and that he was the future of their kingdom. Closing her eyes with tears, Tia thought that she also wanted to be like them, contribute to the kingdom and be a source of pride for her subjects. Looking at the notes on her hand, Tia said that she believes that with their contribution, they will definitely be able to overcome this disaster. The crowd of soldiers raised their fists in glee. She thought about how she could leave now, and she didn't have anything else to do here. Fu Leixi asked her to stay because he had something to report to her. Thinking how much of a hassle this was, she ordered him to speak. Pointing his finger at the protagonist, he shouted that the man had disregarded military discipline and decided to challenge him as his commanding officer. Fu Leixi suggested that the rookie duel should be replaced with a duel between them. He said that on the one hand, he would be able to use it as an example for new recruits to learn a lesson about military discipline, and on the other, they would be able to lighten the mood at this induction ceremony. Tia thought that this old man just wanted to beat up the rookie and show that he was in charge. Laughing, she said that she didn't think it was necessary and everything would continue as usual. Fu Leixi agreed. The protagonist thought that saying it so obviously wouldn't work, because Tia only wants to get out of here as soon as possible. Tia said that, in that case, he was leaving the event. Zhu Yingsu said with a smile that he was very sorry. After all, fighting a general was such a rare opportunity. He said that he was sure that the princess had important matters to attend to and was in such a hurry to leave. He asked her if she wanted to join Prince Luozi on his expedition or attend a seminar with Prince Katie. Tia stopped, her eyes opening in surprise. The main character said that he is sure that any of these events are more important than the service entry ceremony. Tia's eyes widened in shock. Turning around, she wondered how he knew about this if her brother's assignments hadn't been made public. She thought he was like that. Tia said that he wouldn't take part in their tasks. Zhu Yingsu thought that he expected nothing less from his female lead. She wouldn't lie to find an excuse. He asked her if she didn't have anything urgent to do, why didn't she stay and watch their duel? Frowning, Tia told Fu Leixi that he was right, and he was indeed a cheeky person. She asked me to take care of finding out its origin. She thought about how he wouldn't dare make a fool of her. The main character smilingly told her not to worry and said that he was just a small minor, and in the end, a person is always waiting for death. He said that he just wanted to die with honor on this stage. He thought that getting her to fall into her trap was noticeably harder than he thought, and he had no other choice. The main character said with a smile that it was better than being a dummy all my life. Tia cursed furiously in her head. Fu Leixi looked at him in surprise and thought that he was no doubt willing to offend the royal family just for the sake of dueling with him. He thought that to do such a thing, he must be either a stupid or unusual person. Fu Leixi assumed with a grim face that he had an influential background or was deliberately pretending to be a fool to make him relax. Tia said that since he was so determined to die, she would help him. She announced that the duel would begin immediately. In her mind, she told him to show her what he could do. Frowning, the protagonist thought that his plan had worked and that he felt sorry for Tia. He thought that if he hadn't attracted her attention in ways that would hurt her the most, an ordinary soldier like him would never have been able to force the princess to stay. Glancing at Fu Leixi, he thought that the most important thing was that this was the only way to make Fu Leixi suspect him. The main character thought that because of his cautious nature, he most likely started worrying about whether he had a strong background, and as long as he had this advantage, he had a chance of winning. Tia asked them to come on stage. Zhu Yingxu and Fu Leixi stepped onto the stage, and they were inside a purple transparent cube. Folding his hands on his sword, Fu Leixi said that he would explain to him, the naughty boy from the village, what this glowing field of energy was called. The main character replied that it was called a magic barrier, and after entering it, he could never leave it until the winner was announced. Fu Leixi clicked his tongue and said that he knew a lot. He frowned and said that it wouldn't help him, and that magic barrier would disappear after a single move. Tia announced the start of the duel. Fu Leixi and the main character were facing each other in battle stances. Fu Leixi disappeared and appeared in front of the main character, striking out with his sword. Zhu Yingxu blocked the blow with his sword. Grinning, he asked if that was what he meant by killing with one punch. He thought that he was in a lot of pain. His arm was about to break, which was to be expected from Fu Leixi. Frowning, he shouted that he was being presumptuous. He thought about how the strength of the fist that he had caught earlier wasn't enough to block it. He assumed that he was holding back on purpose. There was an explosion between them, and they jumped back in opposite directions. The soldiers cheered that he was actually able to take General Fu Leix's punch. Another guy in the crowd shouted that Fu Leixi was a newly appointed general, and being able to take a hit from him meant that he had at least the strength of a commander. The crowd shouted that he was strong and that they didn't expect this. Fu Leixi cursed angrily. As he approached the main character, he asked how they could praise a non-entity like him and leave him in the background. Oni said that he would chop them all into pieces as soon as he got down from this stage. Zhu Yingxu pointed at him with his sword and said that unfortunately, he wouldn't be able to do it. Fu Leixi asked what he had just said. With a frown, the main character said that he was the one who would come out of this magic barrier. The afternoon sun was shining over the arena. The main character was thrown back by the force of the impact. Gritting his teeth, he thought that the difference in strength was too great, and he didn't have the combat experience that Fu Leixi had. He thought that he would still hold on no matter what. He started to climb to his feet, and Fu Leixi said that he would see how much longer he could hold on. Frowning, the protagonist told him that he didn't seem to understand that he was becoming increasingly useless in the princess' eyes. Fu Leixi charged at him, shouting for him to die. Opening his eyes wide, he wondered if this attack would be from the left or the right. He thought that he should know because he is the author. He remembered playing a game while sitting on the couch with a gamepad. After losing, he thought that the swordsman was very good at this game. He thought that he had added the same skills as Fu Leixi, especially the long-range lightning attack. After dodging his attack, Zhu Yingxu gritted his teeth and thought that even the wind from his attacks was dangerous for him. He thought that he couldn't give up now. The wind from Fu Leixi's attack left 3 cuts on his cheek. Frowning, Fu Leixi glanced in his direction and thought that he had dodged his attack at the last moment. Frowning, the protagonist told him that he could do better. Fu Leixi swung his sword in front of him, and the protagonist dodged by jumping up. Noticing that he had dodged his attack again, he wondered if he could predict his movements. The main character jumped on top of him, swinging his sword. He slashed out with his sword, and Fu Leixi blocked his attack with his hand. Gritting his teeth, Zhu Yingxu thought that he couldn't even break through his armor and that he had to hurry because he would die if the fight continued. Smiling, he said that he hoped it wasn't General Fu Leix's full power. The veins on Fu Leix's forehead bulged with anger. Cursing, he swung his sword in front of him, and the force of the blow knocked the protagonist back. Opening his mouth wide in pain, he thought that it was very painful, and even knowing the character, he couldn't dodge its attack. Looking at Zhu Yingxu lying on the ground, Fu Leixi thought that he had finally done it. Standing next to him, he said that he was worried that he was one of those people who hid their real strength, but he realized that he was just an arrogant fool who didn't know his place. Raising his fist, he exclaimed that the victory was his. He shouted about how it happens if you disrespect him, how it happens to those who rebel against the Feng Kingdom and everyone who becomes an enemy of the Feng Kingdom. Princess Tia, the soldiers, the townspeople, and the king listened intently to his speech. Fu Lesi said that he would tear them to pieces. Swinging his sword, he shouted for the protagonist to die. The main character is lying on the ground with his fists clenched. The impact sent a cloud of dust into the air. The Maki brothers excitedly called out to their leader. Standing in the cloud of dust, Fu Leixi thought that it was over and the words he just said would definitely raise him in rank. Looking around, he wondered why the barriers still hadn't disappeared. Zhu Yingxu jumped out of the dust cloud. Fu Leixi turned around, and a fist slammed into his face. The impact sent him flying into the barrier, causing it to be covered with cracks at the site of the collision. The soldiers cheered that Zhu Yingxu hadn't died and that he was very strong. The main character stood in a cloud of dust with his eyes closed and thought about how he almost died, and Fu Leixi's attack was dangerous. Fu Lexi asked what it was. He thought about how it was possible that his power was instantly multiplied and who he really was. Frowning, the protagonist thought that fortunately, he still had 20 unallocated points. He thought that he had no choice but to use all of his points in order to increase his strength. The status window read, Power 28, Magic 11, Endurance 6, Agility 5, Perception 2. A dialogue box announced that all points had been used up. Frowning, the protagonist shouted that he was an ordinary miner and he had come here to volunteer to serve the Feng Kingdom. However, Fu Leixi was angry at him for a small simple incident, and if he lost this battle, he would be executed. He shouted that he didn't come here to die, but to go to war and exterminate the demons. He said he needed the help of the entire public. People in the crowd were asking what he was doing, and how dare he ask for help in a fight to the death. One person in the crowd coughed and said that it was fun, especially since judging from the fight, this rookie is strong on par with Fu Lexi. The people in the crowd raised their fists in the air in glee, supporting him and calling for the general to be killed. The main character stood surrounded by the shouts of the crowd. Tia was surprised to see that the entire audience had taken the rookie's side and Lieutenant Fu Lexi had lost the advantage. Fu Lexi said gloomily about how they dared to support a low-ranking soldier. The main character thought about what was about to start. Fu Lexi furiously said that he would kill everyone. The protagonist thought that when Fu Lexi goes into a rage, he enters a state of insanity, and in this state, his strength is doubled, but he will not come to his senses and will indiscriminately attack anyone he deems hostile. Fu Lexi stood wrapped in purple energy and shouted furiously. The protagonist with a calm face thought that this was his key to victory, and he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. He thought about how when they were on the boat, he had attacked him, but it wasn't just to initiate a confrontation with him, it was also to make him think that he was weak. He thought that other than that, he was very crafty and wouldn't accept a challenge if he wasn't sure he could win, so the protagonist had no choice but to provoke him and the princess, which angered the proud general. He thought that sooner or later it would end. Zhu Yingxu thought that the person who was trying to regain his reputation was killed by him while bragging about his victory. He decided it was a good ending. Glancing to the side, he thought that if he stood still, he would no longer be considered a hostile person in Fu Lexi's eyes, and he would start attacking the public instead. The guy shouted at Fu Lexi that he was stupid and sent him home to grow potatoes, just like the grumpy old man should. Laughing, he added that he had never treated recruits like human beings, and he got what he deserved. Fu Lexi ran furiously, and the protagonist thought that the Make brothers had caught his attention in time. Fu Lexi kicked off the ground and burst through the magic barrier, shattering it into fragments. Zhu Yingxu thought that now that Fu Lexi had lost control, he would break through the barrier to attack them, and the barrier's defense mechanism would be activated. He thought that the barrier's defense mechanism would trap anyone who tried to leave the battlefield by force. The long purple magic tentacles grabbed Fu Lexi, causing him to hang suspended in midair. Zhu Yingxu thought that in terms of strength, he was no match for Fu Lexi. However, now that he was trapped, it was time to hunt. The main character glanced at Fu Lexi, who was suspended in the air. Fu Lexi was suspended in midair, trapped by the barrier's defense mechanism. Pushing off from the ground, the main character jumped at him from behind, holding a sword in his hand. Frowning, he swung his sword. After swinging his sword, Zhu Yingxu found himself on the ground in front of Fu Lexi. The general's head flew off his shoulders. Tia, the soldiers, and the townspeople all opened their mouths in surprise. The speakers announced that the match was over and the winner was Zhu Yingxu. The soldiers raised their fists in the air and chanted, "The strongest recruit." The main character stood surrounded by shouting soldiers. The main character thought that he didn't expect this. The dialogue box says, "Congratulations on winning the title of strongest recruit and receiving the following rewards: 30 skill points. Unlocked a new skill of the author Control plus S, save. After using up the likes of readers, you can save the user status for a short time, while saving any enemy attack will be useless. Unlocked a new skill of the author, Ctrl+H, hide. This skill uses reader likes to make the user temporarily invisible. Received a special reward, unknown. Zhu Yingxu, looking at the dialogue boxes, thought that these new skills of the author were simply incredible. People exclaimed as they saw the king's face on the purple screen above the arena. Tia thought that no one had warned her about this. Closing his eyes and shaking his head, the king said that he saw that there were still talented people in their kingdom. He said that the rookie was able to defeat the general, and this was something he had never seen before. He added that this happened at the wrong time and is a problem. Zhu Yingxu, addressing the king, asked if he was worried that the volunteer army no longer had a general. With a chuckle, the king said that it was true, and according to the original plan, the new recruits would be led by Fu Leixi tomorrow as an alternative army to support Prince Luozi's troops. Luozi appeared on the screen, surrounded by troops, and the king said that they destroyed a huge number of monsters, but they continue to appear. He told the protagonist that since Fu Leixi had died at his hands, he was appointing him as the temporary commander of the volunteer army, and he would lead them instead of Fu Leixi. Zhu Yingxu replied that he was just a new recruit, and he wouldn't be able to convince the people that he had the ability to be a commander. He asked him to appoint someone who could convince everyone. Tia frowned and asked permission to lead the army and go to war for her kingdom. She thought that she wouldn't miss this opportunity and didn't want people to keep calling her useless. The main character said that Princess Tia is really the right person for the job, and as a soldier, he believes that she will lead them to victory. The king asked Princess Tia if she thought she could handle it. Tia said yes. She shouted that she could do it and proved to him that she was worthy of the task. The king announced that he was appointing her commander of the alternative volunteer army. He thought that she was finally starting to act like a princess. Turning to the main character, the king said that he fights very well, and in this task he will be responsible for protecting the princess. Zhu Yingxu obeyed. Frowning, he thought that the plot was finally moving in the direction he wanted. He thought that he finally had the chance to meet Tia directly. The king announced that the ceremony of entering the service was over. Tia asked the protagonist if he did all this just for the sake of fighting Fu Leixi. She asked who he was. The main character replied that he was an ordinary miner. Frowning, Tia said that she didn't know what his real intentions were, but fighting for her kingdom had always been her dream, and she owed him for what had happened today. As she left, she said that she would see him on the battlefield tomorrow and give him some advice. Frowning, Zhu Yingxu thought that as an author, he knew her very well, and she was a person who respected herself and never gave up. He thought that if he wanted to get her out of her cage and force her to change, he should let her take that step on her own instead of opening the door for her. A crescent moon is visible in the sky. Barracks of the volunteer army. Voices shouted that the leader was very handsome and that the lieutenant's armor was really different. The main character looks at himself in the mirror, dressed in a lieutenant's armor, holding Kate's alloy enchanted sword, and his belt was inlaid with a low-quality magic stone. People shouted that his weapon had also been upgraded to a high-level sword encrusted with magic stones, and that when he went into battle tomorrow, he would kill all the monsters. On the dialogue box, it said, Strength 28, Mana 11, Endurance 16, Agility 15, Perception 12, Unallocated skill points 0, Equipment bonus 30, Overall combat strength 112. Looking at the dialogue box, Zhu Yingxu thought that his overall strength wasn't even close to that of Prince Luozi. He thought that the plan to kill the Demon King with his current strength was crazy and he needed to get stronger. Turning to the Maki brothers, he asked if anyone had come to deliver the military report. He told them to find it and quickly read what it said. One of them asked if there was such a thing. Another replied that it must be somewhere. One of them said that he found it, and it says that Prince Luozi and his soldiers are in the demon nest in the southwest, exterminating the skeleton army controlled by the undead. He said that these skeleton armies are large and indestructible, and there is currently no effective way to destroy the enemy other than exterminating each skeleton one at a time. The dark-haired guy, trembling, asked if they were really going to do it tomorrow. The protagonist thought that the biggest problem facing Prince Luozi wasn't the skeleton army, but the armies of other kingdoms. He thought that their mission to destroy the demons was a lie, and all they wanted was to steal the undead magic stone from the Skeleton King. He thought that thanks to the undead magic stone, the Skeleton King could control the corpses, and if the prince's soldiers died, they would also be controlled. Zhu Yingxu thought that if he obtained this magic stone, he would have more confidence to attack the Demon King in the future, and right now, his top priority was to help Prince Luozi and the others defeat the skeleton army in the southwest. He decided that after that, he would enter the Skeleton King's cave and steal the magic stone. He wrote something on a piece of paper. The main character held out a piece of paper and told the guys to go and quickly buy the things written on this piece of paper. They exclaimed in surprise and asked why he wanted to buy something like this in the middle of the night. He told them to go and not ask. Purple lightning flashed over the dead trees. Someone shouted, "Excalibur!" Luozi swung his sword in front of him. A wave of purple energy smashed the skeletons apart. A cloud of dust rose at the foot of the mountain. The purple-haired guy with glasses said that it was time for the Feng Kingdom army to rest. Luozi replied that there was no need, since they all knew what the Genki Kingdom really wanted. General Nord of the Genki Kingdom grinned and said that since he was so open, he would play fair with him. Luozi frowned as he turned around and told him to give it a try. Lightning flashed behind him. Squads of soldiers approached the skull-shaped cave. Tia ordered a stop. Frowning, she said that Skullcap Canyon was ahead and ordered the soldiers to prepare for battle. One of the 3 men on horseback told her to get ready. Lieutenant Dollar said she was the only one who had never been on the battlefield. Lieutenant Ella told her to stay back the rest of the way and that she was too weak, and if she got hurt, she would be a burden to them and she couldn't let that happen. Tia said that there was no need and ordered the troops to move forward. Zhu Yingsu thought that everyone thought she was weak, but she wanted to prove that she wasn't. He thought that she had a strong character that could not only make her grow, but also lead to disaster, and so he had to protect her no matter what. A dialogue box appeared in front of him, which says, "Task: kill the Skeleton King to get the Undead Stone. Condition: become the next master of the Undead Stone." Note: the initial assessment of Manhwa will be published for the first time after the end of the Skull Canyon chapter. The main character thought that it would not be easy. He thought that the Canyon of Skulls had 4 floors, each with a boss and countless small monsters. He thought that once they defeated the boss of the first floor, the road to the next floor would be opened, and the strength of each boss would increase from floor to floor. Frowning, Zhu Yingsu thought that he couldn't defeat the Skeleton King with his own strength at the moment, and all he could do now was fight small monsters while growing stronger, and then gather the strength of other characters to defeat the Skeleton King. The troops approached the cave. Tia stepped inside. She thought that she didn't want to be left behind and wouldn't let them underestimate her. Looking around, the main character thought that he remembered what was at the entrance to the cave. A skeleton with a sword appeared in front of him. The skeleton charged, swinging its sword at Princess Tia. The main character quickly took her out of the way, and the skeleton hit the ground, raising a cloud of dust. The dust cloud dispersed, and the skeleton said that the intruders who enter here must die. Tia asked why the monster at the entrance wasn't killed if her brother had already passed this place. Zhu Yingsu replied that the undead can only be killed by the owner of the magic stone. Otherwise, as long as there is at least one bone left intact, the skeleton can regenerate. Wrapped in blue energy, she said that she would freeze him. The blue magic ceiling moved towards the skeleton. Ice enveloped the skeleton, and the protagonist praised Princess Tia in his mind as he rushed forward. He swung his sword, and the skeleton shattered into ice-encased bones. In front of them, a pile of bones encased in ice lay on the ground. Dollar said that he didn't expect the strongest recruit and the weakest princess to work together. Ella laughed and asked if she was as weak as the rumors said she was. Tia gritted her teeth in anger, shrouded in blue energy. Zhu Yingsu thought that she was angry. He shouted at her that they shouldn't fight at this moment. A stream of blue energy shot towards the lieutenants. They opened their mouths in surprise. Above them was a skeleton encased in ice. He fell to the ground. Frowning, Tia told them not to underestimate her. The main character thought that this was to be expected from his heroine. He asked the lieutenants if they would like to thank her. Ella and Dollar grudgingly thanked Princess Tia. She told the protagonist that the previous attack was a mistake on her part and thanked him for saving her. He said it was his duty to protect her. She said that he recently said that undead can only be killed by the master of the undead magic stone. She asked how he knew such information. Zhu Yingsu paused nervously. Tia went ahead and said that it didn't matter, and it was better to avoid internal conflicts for now. She said it was just an entrance and said to leave some soldiers here to keep an eye on the frozen skeletons. The dialogue box says, "Undead killed, 1. Points received, 1. Pushing off from the ground, Ella hit the skeletons with her daggers and said, cursing, that they keep appearing again and again. The skeleton leapt at her, swinging its sword. Dollar killed the skeleton and Ella thanked him. He shouted that they had killed the first wave of skeletons, but they were still regenerating. The main character jumped up above the crowd of skeletons. After hitting the crowd of skeletons, he shouted that they should not lose hope, because the more damage the skeletons take, the slower they will regroup. He shouted that they were just small monsters that shouldn't be feared. He added that the princess can use ice magic. Zhu Yingsu gave her the command to attack. Tia held out her hands, shrouded in blue energy. The staff began to glow with a blue light. The skeletons in front of her were encased in ice. They said that the monsters on the first floor were problematic and wondered how they would be able to defeat the boss of the last floor. The main character smilingly praised Princess Tia for her good work, and she told him to move on. They were standing in front of a fork in the road. Ella said the road split up and asked where they were going. Tia frowned and said to the left. Someone said that there should be traces of a battle here. Tia said that the huge crack in the wall was probably made by her brother. The main character suggested to divide the troops into 2 groups, and he will go to the left with the princess, and they will go to the right with Ella, and will be able to help each other if something goes wrong. Tia thought about it, frowning. She remembered asking him how he knew that the undead could only be killed by the owner of the undead magic stone. Dollar frowned and asked why they should split up if they already knew which road was the right one. He asked what he was up to. Tia agreed. She said that she would go to the right with Zhu Yingsu, while Dollar and Ella would go to the left. The lieutenants thought discontentedly that they were doing whatever they wanted. They agreed. The main character thought that the information he told her to start suspecting him worked, and she most likely thought that he decided to go right for some specific reason. He thought that they could only defeat the boss of this floor, the skeleton general, by splitting up, otherwise they wouldn't be able to break the thing in their hands. They went forward. Tia said it was strange, because they had been walking for a long time, but they still hadn't come, and they hadn't encountered a single monster since they entered. She said that, instead, there are many small empty caves like this. She asked him what he thought was going on. Zhu Yingsu said that the skeletons are dead people who are controlled by the Skeleton King with the undead magic stone. And although they are considered a new creature, they still have a human form, and this row of empty caves is most likely the skeleton's living quarters. He said that because Prince Luozi has already passed through here, all the skeletons have been killed, and so they are all empty. Tia replied that it made sense and asked if they had gone the wrong way. Frowning, she asked him if he had deliberately avoided the battle by taking this road. He said she was wrong. He thought that he hadn't expected such a question. Tia said he was weird and always seemed to know something that no one else knew, even when they entered this place. She said that right now, he's very calm, as if he knows what's going to happen. The protagonist, trembling, looked away and thought that he was nervous and wondered why this thing hadn't appeared yet. One of the caves glowed purple. A skeleton emerged from it. The broomstick-wielding skeleton said that the soldiers had finally left and he could clean up. Noticing the main characters, he was surprised to ask how people ended up here. Zhu Yingsu thought that he was just in time and shouted at him to wait. The skeleton opened a purple portal in front of it. The main character rushed forward, shouting at him to stop. Tia shouted for the main character to wait. There was a purple flash and they were gone. The soldiers exclaimed in surprise that the princess and the lieutenant had disappeared. One of them ordered me to go and report this to Lieutenant Dollar. Tia squeezed her eyes shut, holding her head, and said that she had hit her head. She asked where they were. The skeleton shouted to the main character not to approach. He fearfully asked not to kill him, and that he was just a janitor, not a soldier. Zhu Yingsu replied that he was an undead and they couldn't kill him. The skeleton replied that it was, but if they hit it, it would hurt. The main character said that they would not harm him because he is not a soldier. He said they would help him. He thought that this skeleton was an additional character that he had created. In addition to enslaving the fallen soldiers, the Skeleton King enslaved the fallen commoners to serve the skeleton soldiers. Their level is so low that they can move through normal passageways, and they only use narrow and secret passageways to do their job. Although they can't advance to the next level of the dungeon, they can move to any location in that level. The skeleton asked if it could really help him leave this place. With a tear in his empty eye socket, he said that he had been cleaning here for 135 years, and in his spare time, soldiers beat him up, then laugh and watch him regenerate. He said that even if he wanted to die, he couldn't do it, and he tried to run, but the Skeleton King caught him and put a mark that wouldn't let him go. The main character awkwardly replied that he realized that he had a difficult life. He thought that he wrote this dialogue when he didn't want to work. Tia, on the verge of tears, said that it was terrible, and they would definitely help him get out of here. Zhu Yingsu thought that he hadn't clarified his terms yet. He said that he would help him get out of here after he brought him to a certain place. Ella was thrown into the wall, leaving a dent covered in cracks. Frowning, she asked how he could be so strong and said that they were no match for him. The skeleton general was standing in front of her, surrounded by a purple aura. Dollar, Ella, and their troops were standing in front of the skeleton general. Frowning, Ella said that she would fight until the very end. She charged at the monster. The skeleton general blocked the blow with his shield. He hit her with his shield, and she was thrown back. Ella hit the wall. Falling to the ground, she gritted her teeth and said that nothing could break through his shield at all. Dollar ordered the wizards to attack. The wizards raised their staffs in the air, shrouded in purple magic. The flow of magic headed towards the skeleton general. A pillar of purple light is wrapped around him. Dollar laughed and said that everything should work out now. The skeleton general stood untouched, shrouded in a purple aura. Dollar cursed and shouted that magic attacks didn't work either. Gritting his teeth, he wondered if he was just a dead man and why he was using his shield as his primary method of attack. He thought that his shield looked very familiar and it reminded him of someone. In the Western District, there was once a general who was great at defense. It is said that he had an almost impenetrable shield that could protect him from anything, regardless of whether it was a physical or magical attack. He waited until the enemies were exhausted and then killed them. Dollar wondered if the Skeleton King could have resurrected his corpse and turned it into an undead. He assumed that he retained the fighting style that he had mastered during his lifetime. He wondered how they could beat him. A purple light can be seen behind the stone wall, and the main character and the skeleton cleaner peeked out from behind it. The main character thought that they had managed to teleport the skeleton general behind their backs. The skeleton cleaner wondered why he had agreed to help them in the first place. 3 minutes ago, the main character frowned and said to listen carefully. He said that this skeleton was revived from the corpse of a general named Monty, and it has an incredibly strong shield, so any head-on attacks against it will be ineffective. Frowning, Tia shouted that she was right, and he really did know something that even she didn't. Zhu Yingsu went on to say that even such a shield could only serve as a defense against direct attacks, so the only way to defeat it was to attack from both sides. Tia thought irritably that she couldn't believe he'd ignored her. Turning to the skeleton, he asked its name. The skeleton replied that his name was Valley. Frowning, the protagonist told him that he wanted him to lead them right behind the skeleton general. He thought that if he used Princess Tia's power effectively, he could turn the tide of the battle in their favor. Dollar charged, swinging his axe. He swung it, and the skeleton general blocked the attack with his shield. Dollar swore. Zhu Yingsu gave Tai the command to attack. Tia thought that she should be the one in charge here. The staff in her hands glowed with blue magic, and she said, 3 feet of deep freeze. She thrust her staff forward, firing blue magic. The skeleton general turned around. His hand was encased in ice. The main character charged, gritting his teeth. He chopped off the frozen arm of the skeleton general. The hand fell to the ground. Ella wondered where it had come from. Dollar cursed, thinking that he had separated them to use as bait while he prepared a sneak attack. The main character asked what they were waiting for. He said that his shield had fallen and they should stand up and fight. They charged. The skeleton general glared at them angrily. Zhu Yingsu's eyes widened in surprise. Looking at the sword that was wrapped in a green aura, he thought that there was something wrong with this sword. He remembered drawing the skeleton general. Next to his sword is written, nervous paralysis. The main character thought that he was not just a dead man, and he has an incredibly strong shield and sword that can cause paralysis. He decided it was too much and removed the paralysis effect. He wondered why the sword from the design version was here if he had removed the abilities of this sword in the final version. The main character shouted at everyone to stay away from him. The skeleton general swung his sword. He hit Ella, Dollar, and the main character. They fell to the ground. Tia cursed, frowning. She and Valley are sitting behind a wall. Tia shouted that she had to help them. Valley grabbed her wrist and told her to think better of it. She said that she was a mage, and if she fought him in close combat, she wouldn't be able to win. She swore back. Wally said in a frightened voice that he was finished, and if he found out that he had opened a secret passage for them, he would be killed. Tia exclaimed that he was already dead. The skeleton general stepped forward. The main character thought that he couldn't move at all. He wondered how it was possible, since he definitely removed the Underground King but accidentally released it when he removed the barrier, and this time he didn't do anything at all, but the cut elements still appear. He reached out to the administrator in his mind and asked why this was happening, and if it was because he had rebooted the world. The administrator replied that this was not the case, and the reason was unknown. The main character swore. Lying on the ground in front of the skeleton general, he thought that the paralysis would last for about another minute. He asked what he should do. The skeleton general swung his sword, shrouded in green energy. Zhu Yingsu closed his eyes, gritted his teeth, and cursed. A burst of blue magic shot out at the skeleton king. He spun around, and the magic hit him in the torso. The magic headed back to Princess Tia, and Valley exclaimed that he had deflected it. He asked her to keep her promise. He ran forward and blocked her from the magic projectile with his body. Tia called out his name. Wally asked that even if it turned to ice, he would take it with him if they could leave this place. The purple energy from his finger was channeled into the stone on her tiara. Tia opened her eyes in surprise. Wally lay on the ground in front of her, encased in ice. The main character noticed that he could move again. The skeleton general turned to him and swung his sword. After piercing the main character's body, it lifted him off the ground. He was trembling, his mouth hanging open. Tia called out to him, frowning. After being silent for a while, Zhu Yingsu said that it was close. The dialogue box says, saving active, total likes from readers, 1152. Consumption per second, 100. He thought that he had obtained the body strengthening skill after defeating Fu Lesi. He thought that the moment he regained his mobility, he activated save, and thanks to this, his current body state remains unchanged, and even if it only lasts for 10 seconds, in this period of time, he will be invincible. The main character swung his sword, hitting the skeleton general with it. Frowning, he called out to Tia. She corrected him by saying that she was Commander Tia. She held out her staff, which was wrapped in blue magic. The blue magic headed towards the skeleton general. He was encased in ice. They were standing around the skeleton general who was encased in ice. Zhu Yingsu let out a sigh of relief. He opened his eyes and looked away. Looking at Princess Tia who was standing next to the block of ice, he wondered what she was doing. He asked her why she looked so depressed if they had won. Tia said that before Valley turned to ice, he had told her why he wanted to leave this place. She said that he and his best friend died on the same day when bandits destroyed their village, and he thought that dying together with his best friend wasn't so bad. However, he was eventually turned into an undead by the Skeleton King and was forced to leave this nameless graveyard, becoming a janitor in Skull Canyon. Tia frowned and said that he wanted them to take him away from here and take him back to the village, but he helped her block that deflected attack. Zhu Yingsu thought that Princess Tia's magic was a secret technique of the royal family, and there was no way to break this absolute freeze. And even though Wally was dead, but his 5 senses were completely sealed, and it was no different from death. He decided that this wasn't the time to be sad, and he had to help her cheer up. He told her that although there were some things that he couldn't explain, if they could defeat the Skeleton King, then he could revive Valley. Tia thought that he didn't know anything about royal magic. Then she thought that he knew a lot of things that even she didn't know. Tia asked if it was true. The door in the wall slowly opened. The passage that opened glowed with a purple light. Zhu Yingsu raised his eyebrows. Tia ordered everyone to listen to her order. She told them to form a line and go through the portal to the next floor, and that their goal was to help the vanguard troops and destroy the Skeleton King. Second floor of Skull's Canyon. The troops marched through the dark cave, carrying blocks of ice with them. One of the soldiers carrying the ice block asked why they even had to carry this bone block of ice and his shield. Another replied that it couldn't be helped because they were just ordinary skeletons. Ella and Tia noticed the sound and said it sounded very familiar. They looked up and saw a bone dragon. The dragon sat down on a rock and let out a loud growl. Dollar exclaimed that it was a dragon. Zhu Yingsu frowned and thought that he had come. He thought it was the second floor's mini-boss, the bone dragon. The dragon shot a beam of blue energy from its mouth. The beam hit the ground, scattering people and leaving 2 streaks in the ground. Looking down, Dollar asked how they were supposed to defeat him. Frowning, the protagonist thought that that wasn't what he needed to worry about at the moment. He thought that if the items he had deleted reappeared, then they would have big problems and he should just wait and see what would be bigger. The dragon struck with blue magic. Tia clasped her hands, wrapped in blue energy, and shouted, "The ice sheet." The ice shield blocked the blue dragon's magic. Dollar instructed the mages to prepare their spells. He said that this time, the enemy doesn't have a shield to block their attacks. The mages raised their staffs, which were shrouded in purple energy. A stream of purple magic flowed towards the dragon. The purple magic strike sent up a cloud of dust. Frowning, Dollar said it should work. His eyes widened in surprise. The bone dragon was on the ground next to him. With a flick of its tail, it threw the soldiers into the air. Tia asked the main character what they should do to defeat the dragon. She asked him why he just stood there and watched, if he always had some secret way. Gritting his teeth, Zhu Yingsu thought that the only reason he won all the fights after moving to this comic was because of his deep understanding of the characters, but he can't remember everything he drew and deleted because there were so many changes in the designs. He decided that he had no choice. The main character told the Mackie brothers to bring what he asked them for. Grinning, they asked that they were finally using it. They said they had been waiting for this for a long time. Army Treasury. The Mack brothers are standing in front of the huge doors. One of them asked why the boss had instructed them to come to the treasury in the middle of the night to steal the golden magic stones if they were going to the front line tomorrow. Another replied that he said it would help them fight monsters. They shouted about how much gold there was and how they could barely contain their thieving nature. Another shouted, "Don't even think about it." They held large yellow stones in their hands. The main character thought that the bone dragon doesn't have strong defense, unlike the skeleton general, but its speed is huge, so it will be difficult to hit it. He shouted at them to throw them into the pit. The Mack brothers threw stones into the pit, shouting that it was a waste of money. The bone dragon turned around. He flew, and the main character thought that Western dragons are very greedy creatures by nature. The bone dragon sat down on the ground next to the rocks. Dragons are incredibly fond of treasures and shiny things. Frowning, Zhu Yingsu thought that a long time ago, the bone dragon was imprisoned by the Skeleton King, and he didn't manage to collect the treasures to build his nest out of, and he would definitely be attracted by the golden magic stones that he brought here. Holding out his hand, the protagonist shouted, "Fukai Ruota." The stones in front of the dragon glowed with a bright yellow light. An explosion occurred. A dragon horn, glowing blue, shot out from the explosion. He fell to the ground in front of the main character. Lifting it in his hand, he told the princess to freeze all the dragon bones except the horn in his hand. He wondered if he was dead, and it was that simple. He wondered if it could be that the changes to the skeleton general's settings were just a mistake. Dollar turned around and said that even if they had killed the boss of this floor, the passage to the next floor still hadn't opened yet. Zhu Yingsu opened his eyes in surprise and thought that something was wrong here. A huge bone dragon was standing in front of them. The main character shouted to everyone to leave quickly. He thought that the changes that had been restored this time were that there were 2 bone dragons, and after the first one was defeated, the second one would appear. Blue energy began to gather in the dragon's mouth. The main character thought that he didn't have any more golden magic stones. He asked what he should do. The dragon shot a beam of blue energy from its mouth. A stream of blue energy shot towards the troop of soldiers. Frowning, Zhu Yingsu shouted for them to run. A stream of energy hit the wall of ice. They were standing behind a wall of ice. Frowning, Tia screamed. Laughing, Dollar mockingly shouted at the dragon that this trick wouldn't work on them, because their princess ice magic had no equal in the entire world. Ella said that his attitude quickly changed. Dollar smiled awkwardly and asked if this was true. Ella frowned and said she was surprised. She added that when it comes to surprises, Zhu Yingsu is even better. He was standing with a sword and a dragon horn in his hands. Gritting his teeth, he thought that the dragon horn was reacting, which meant that the other bone dragon was regenerating. The protagonist shouted to Tai that she needed to freeze the bone dragon as soon as possible, otherwise they would definitely die when they were attacked by 2 dragons at once. Tia called back to see if he could see that she was busy. Wrapped in blue energy, the dragon regenerated. Zhu Yingsu thought that the second dragon was deliberately trying to delay them. The dragon is lying on the ground, shrouded in blue energy. The main character thought that they didn't have time. The dragon's eye glowed red. One dragon continued to shoot a beam of energy from its mouth at the ice shield, while the other dragon rose to its feet. The main character stood surrounded by soldiers. Gritting his teeth, he thought about what they should do. The dragon flew towards them. Frowning, Zhu Yingsu thought that he had another trump card up his sleeve. Turning around, he shouted for everyone to take each other's hands and stick together. Dollar asked him what he wanted to do. Frowning, the protagonist shouted at them to do as he says if they don't want to die. The soldiers joined hands. Tia turned to the main character. He told her to trust him. Frowning, she nodded. Frowning, Zhu Yingsu used invisibility. The bone dragon flew up from the ground. He looked ahead in surprise. There was no one on the ground in front of the 2 dragons. The dragon dropped to the ground and looked around. Looking at the confused dragons, the main character thought that he had succeeded. Dollar and the soldiers admired the fact that they were invisible. The dialogue box says, invisibility 0.5 likes per second. Due to using the skill simultaneously for 80 people, the cost increased to 40 likes per second. Maximum usage time, 25 seconds. He told Princess Tia that this invisibility skill can only be used for 20 seconds, so they must defeat the bone dragons in that time. He whispered something in her ear. She asked if it would definitely work. The dragon turned around. He saw another dragon in front of him. Zhu Yingsu, standing behind the ice wall, said that Princess Tia was really amazing and turned the ice wall into a real mirror. He said it was likely that the dragon would think it saw its companion when it turned its head back. The main character said that now it remains only to destroy them. Tia shouted to the soldiers to get ready and said that they should kill these dragons with 1 shot, and then she would freeze them. Dollar agreed. Ella accepted the order with a frown. The main character asked Princess Tia to give the order. Tia frowned and ordered an attack. With a swing of their weapons, they cut down the bone dragon. Holding out her palm, Tia shouted, "Boundless ice wall." The dragon in front of them was encased in ice. Frowning, the protagonist announced that they had gotten rid of one of them. The red dialogue boxes say, "Warning, time's up. Invisibility is not available. Please try to get some likes. Current number of readers likes, 0. The main character swore in his head. The soldiers were standing in front of an ice wall. It shattered into fragments, and a bone dragon was standing in front of them. Dollar cursed and shouted that it wasn't ending. Ella swore at the dragon. The dragon struck the ground, sending up a cloud of dust over the broken ground. Gritting his teeth, Zhu Yingsu thought that the dragon had seen that they had frozen his fellow dragon and was angry. Dollar swung his axe and charged, shouting for the dragon to die. He jumped on top of the dragon. He struck, but the dragon disappeared in front of him, and the axe struck the ground. Gritting his teeth, he wondered where it had gone. The jaws of a dragon's mouth appeared behind him. Ella called out to him. The dragon raised the dollar in its mouth above the ground. He coughed in pain. Ella ran to attack the dragon. The dragon soared off the ground, and Ella cursed. He opened his jaws and the dollar fell out. It hit the ground hard, sending up a cloud of dust. The cloud of dust around him dispersed. Frowning, he asked how they could defeat this dragon if it was so fast. Gritting his teeth, Zhu Yingsu said that the first time they used the golden magic stones to lure the dragon and it was blown apart, and the second time they were defeated just because they couldn't see them. He said that the bone dragon's defense isn't particularly strong, but it has a very fast speed, and if they can't catch it, then they're finished, but they can't use the previous tactics to defeat the dragon anymore. He asked them what they should do. A blue status window appeared in front of him. His eyes widened in surprise as he thought, so much. The dragon charged. Tia shouted at the main character to be careful because he was getting close to him. He looked at her and smiled confidently. She wondered what that expression was. The dragon struck the ground, sending up a huge cloud of dust. A bone dragon stood in the scattering cloud of dust. His eyes glowed red. Turning around, he was surprised to see the main character. Zhu Yingsu asked if he was surprised. He thought that after entering the Canyon of Skulls, he was thinking about how to deal with these monsters, and somehow he killed many skeleton soldiers and the first floor boss skeleton general, as well as one bone dragon. He thought that he didn't even realize how quickly he was able to collect a huge amount of skill points. The dialogue box says, Perception 12. Number of unallocated points 32. Equipment bonus 30. The main character thought that he had invested a few points in dexterity. The status window read, Power 28. Magic 11. Endurance 16. Agility 35. Perception 12. Number of unallocated points 12. Equipment bonus 30. Total combat strength 112. He thought that this should be enough to defeat the dragon. Zhu Yingsu was sitting on the dragon's back. Looking back, he noticed the dragon's tail. The dragon swiped its tail, but the main character was no longer there. The dragon noticed the main character in the air from above. He charged at him with a grim face. With a swing of his horn and sword, he hacked the dragon apart. Dollar asked in surprise how he was able to do it so quickly. Ella's mouth dropped open. The Mac brothers exclaimed that he was amazing. Tia wondered how many more secrets he held. She clasped her hands in front of her, surrounded by blue energy, and shouted to leave the rest to her. Raising his hand, Zhu Yingsu asked her to wait. He said that this is the second time it's been broken apart, so it won't recover anytime soon. He said he wanted to negotiate with him. Tia exclaimed in surprise. The main character crouched down next to the dragon and told it that he knew he could hear it, even though he hadn't fully recovered. He said that now the result is clear, and he is not their opponent. Turning to Princess Tia, he told him that he had seen how strong their commander's ice magic was. She told him to make a contract with him and become his subordinate if she didn't want to become an ice cube. Frowning, the protagonist told him to help them open a passage to the next level and move his claws if he agreed. The soldiers and the bone dragon are standing in front of a passageway in the wall, from which a bright purple light was shining. Smiling, Zhu Yingsu thanked the bone dragon for its help. The dragon was standing in front of him. Ella asked how the creature that had nearly killed them had become his pet. The main character was stroking the dragon's head. Dollar said that nothing else would surprise him today. Zhu Yingsu asked the dragon to let him borrow his horn. The dragon was shrouded in blue energy. The main character said that he would return it when they defeated the Skeleton King. He raised a hand that was shrouded in blue energy. Tia asked if he needed the items he collected from the bosses for something. Frowning, she asked how she was supposed to trust him that even now he was still withholding information from her. The main character thought that it looked like he couldn't keep it a secret anymore. He said that there was something he wanted to share with all of them, but only on the condition that none of them asked where he got this information from. He added that he would explain everything when the time came. Dollar frowned and asked why he was collecting the parts of these monsters. The main character frowned and said that the boss parts were the key to defeating the Skeleton King. Ella asked if it was true that if they didn't have these items, they would never be able to beat him. The protagonist replied that this was why Prince Luozi was still on the top floor despite his strength. He said that this teleportation arch was a one-way door, and if they entered just like that without carrying the key elements, they wouldn't be able to go back. Tia said that all the strong experts had defeated the floor bosses, but left out the key items to defeat the Skeleton King. She said in surprise that this was why they were stuck on the top floor, and when they died there, they would turn into the Skeleton King's new puppets. The main character said that the Canyon of Skulls is a trap. Ella held a dagger to his throat. She frowned and said that she wouldn't ask how he knew all this, but he had been hiding this information from them all this time, causing them to lose the initiative in the battle and lose many soldiers. She said that if he had informed the army earlier, Prince Luozi and his team wouldn't have been trapped. Frowning, Zhu Yingsu said that he was a rookie 2 days ago. He asked if they would have listened to him. He thought that if he hadn't come up with so many ideas to defeat Fu Leixi and become a lieutenant, none of the people here would have listened to his words. He thought that's how the world works. If you don't become someone whose words are worth listening to, no one will listen to a word you say. The protagonist calmly said that if he wanted to harm those present here, he wouldn't have come to their aid. Tia stopped them and shouted that this wasn't the time to argue with each other. She shouted for everyone to move forward. The troops entered a passage glowing with purple energy. A purple flash flashed. Tia frowned and asked why it was so hot on this floor. Standing in front of a narrow passage surrounded by lava, she ordered them to move forward. Someone shouted to everyone that skeletons were climbing the wall. The soldiers cursed, and the skeletons charged at them, climbing up the passageway. The skeleton threw the soldier down, and he fell with a cry. He fell into the lava. Tia shouted that she would freeze the lava. The staff in her hands was shrouded in blue energy. The lava was covered with ice. Soon the ice melted. She asked in surprise how it could be possible that she couldn't freeze it. She shouted that her ice magic should be able to freeze anything. Zhu Yingxu said it was lava created by the fire god, Sam. He said she couldn't freeze it now. Tia thought of the fire god in surprise and asked what they should do. The main character shouted at her to freeze the sides of the cliff so that the skeletons couldn't climb. Tia was annoyed when she asked him why he knew more about her magic than she did. Touching the edge of the cliff, she called out, "Ice wall." The rock was covered with ice, and the skeletons fell down. The soldiers were standing on a rock. Ella asked the main character if he had just mentioned the god of fire, Sam. She asked if there might be particularly strong fire mages who were enslaved by the Skeleton King. The main character agreed and thought that Tia was probably worried, because she was the heir of the ice god, and meeting the fire god would be a tough test for her. Princess Tia's eyes widened in surprise when she heard a voice laugh and say that it wasn't what she expected. Behind them was a figure in black magic, shrouded in fire. He said that he thought that under the Skeleton King's control, he would never be able to experience anything interesting and never thought that he would be able to meet the ice god's heir here. He said that, after all, to defeat the skeletons, it was best to freeze them completely or incinerate them completely. Zhu Yingxu shouted at Princess Tia to be careful. The mage fired fire. Fire shot out at Tia. An explosion thundered, scattering rocks. Dollar called out to the princess. When he saw the hole in the passage, he shouted that it had fallen. He looked down, but his eyes widened in surprise. A bone dragon wrapped in purple electricity flew out. The main character and Tia were standing on the back of a bone dragon. Zhu Yingxu stood there with a serious frown. They flew on the dragon towards the fire mage. The mage asked if it was the dragon that was guarding the previous floor. He asked if he had decided to change sides. The dragon opened its mouth nervously. The main character told him not to be afraid and that if they wanted to defeat the Skeleton King, they had no other choice. He shouted for Tia to get ready. She stood stiffly, looking down. The main character called out to her again and thought that she seemed to be thinking about something that happened in the past. The battle between two great battle mages, the ice god Dylan and the fire god Sam, that happened 20 years ago. Within the cubic purple magic barrier, two robed people were floating in the air. Sam said he had been waiting for this battle for years, while Dylan hid and dragged on for more than half a century. Dylan replied that the Grandmaster didn't teach them magic to fight each other. He said that there are many things in this world that need their help. A flame appeared in Sam's hand, and he shouted that he was talking too much. This battle had a huge impact on the fates of all their followers. People in blue clothes, including Tia, shouted to Dylan that he could win, and he was the strongest. The red-robed man told them that they should stop rooting for their master, considering what a coward he was. He asked if such a person could be their master's opponent. There were people in red robes standing in front of them. The guy said that the one leaving this arena would definitely be their master, Fire God Sam. Frowning, Tia said that they will see about that. At the beginning of their battle, the magic skills of both of them were on par with each other, but after a while, the fire god started to lose out in the battle. Due to his peaceful nature, at the moment when he was supposed to kill the fire god, the ice god hesitated. At this moment, the fire god seized the opportunity and killed him. Sam shot fire from his hand while lying on the ground. A pillar of fire could be seen above the arena. The main character thought that, just like in his battle with Fu Lesi, the winner was the one who left the battle arena alive. Tia looked down. The result was two things. First, some of the followers of the ice god left, and some became followers of the fire god. The blue-clothed guy, standing next to the red-clothed guy, said that he would have to rely on his protection in the future, and he was too stupid last time to see the truth. The second thing is that Tia, who is confident and proud, has lost all her confidence, and this is one of the reasons why she doesn't like the battle arena. What was even more ironic was that a few years after the death of the ice god, the fire god went to the Skull Canyon to challenge the Skeleton King and did not return. The fireball flew forward. The dragon shot forward with blue energy. A fireball exploded in the air. Frowning, the protagonist told Princess Tia that he didn't know what she was thinking and hoped that she would decide on the reason why she came to this canyon. He said that she had not come here to prove her courage, nor was it out of good faith. He said that even though she wanted to save her older brother, Prince Luozi, that wasn't the biggest reason she came here. The main character asked if she came here because she was angry. He asked if she was angry because she said she was useless, and if she was angry at herself for not being able to get stronger in her magic, and if she came here because everyone looked down on her. Tia looked away and asked what if that was the case. He wondered if they'd ignored him from the start and if there was a trap somewhere. Zhu Yingxu said that for him, anger is strength more than courage. He said that he didn't care what she was thinking about right now, but if it made her angry, then she should make it a source of her own strength and use it to defeat her enemies. Tia asked if he was angry with people who are obviously weak but rely on their shamelessness and cunning to win, people who throw away their past and change sides, and people who are proud enough to belittle others. The main character replied that there were many such people where he came from, and she is right. He said he was furious. The mage cursed and asked why the two of them were just talking. A fireball appeared above his hand, and he shouted for them to die. The fireball above him was huge, and he shouted, "Fireball." He threw a fireball at them. Frowning, Zhu Yingsu shouted to Princess Tia that if she was furious, now was the time to show it. He opened his eyes in surprise. Tia, wrapped in a strong blue energy, shouted at him to move away because she didn't want to hurt him. A wisp of blue energy appeared in her hand, and she shouted, "1,000-mile ceiling frost." The blue star headed towards the fireball. The mage shouted that it was useless, and even her master couldn't freeze his flames, much less someone like her. Holding out her hands that were wrapped in blue energy, Tia cursed. The fireball wrapped in blue energy continued to approach them. Turning around, the protagonist shouted for the bone dragon to dodge. The fireball flew past them and headed towards the soldiers standing on the ground. The main character swore. Pushing off from the ground, he leaped towards the fireball. He swung his sword, shooting out blue energy. The fireball changed its trajectory, exploding in midair. Zhu Yingsu landed on the back of the bone dragon. A mage surrounded by 6 fireballs said that he would see how long they could dodge. Fireballs shot forward. Dollar gave a command to the wizards. The mages held out their staffs, shooting out purple energy. A large purple magic seal appeared in front of them. Dollar cursed and said that they could hold out for so long. The fireballs hit the magic seal, causing it to crack. Dollar said with a frown that they were finished. There was an explosion in the passageway. The soldier screamed as he was engulfed in flames. The soldiers screamed in the flames in pain. Tia said it was her fault. She asked why things had turned out like last time. Little Tia asked the master why he wasn't accepting the duel. Dylan, standing in front of the window, asked if she really wanted him to fight the fire god. She testily replied that she wanted to, and shouted that the fire god and his followers say that he is a coward because he does not accept his duel. Dylan asked if it hurt her pride, and if she wanted him to accept the fight because it made her angry. He asked her if she'd thought that was exactly what they wanted. Tia said worriedly that she didn't want to be mocked. Exhaling, Dylan said that even the follower he is most proud of wants him to accept the fight. He said it looked like he couldn't avoid it anymore. Tia raised her eyebrows in surprise and happily said that he finally agreed. A pillar of fire is visible above the arena. Tia sits next to Dylan, who is lying on the floor, and says it's her fault. She said that if she hadn't asked him to fight, he wouldn't have ended up in this situation. He replied that he had decided to fight, and it wasn't her fault. He asked her to promise that she would live happily ever after. Tia is sitting at the table, shivering, her face buried in her hands. She looked under the table with teary eyes. She noticed a letter under the table. As she picked it up, she realized that it was a letter from the fire god. The letter said, "I can agree to give you a fire spirit to save a little princess who was injured while learning forbidden spells, but if you want me to do that, there is a condition that you will have to fulfill. This condition is the last battle with me that you will publicly lose to me." Tia read the letter in shock. Tears welled up in her eyes. Glancing at the red stone in her hand, she asked if it was a fire spirit. She thought that she was trying to learn forbidden spells to take her master's place in battle. Tia stands surrounded by a swirl of purple energy and shouts, "Endless frost." Tia thought that she didn't know that forbidden spells turned against the caster and ended up sealing him as well. Dylan pointed his index finger forward, which glowed with a white light, and said, "Disperse." Tia thought that it was lucky that the master interrupted her spell and saved her. Tia, holding a red stone in her hand, asked him what it was. He told her to wear it. He said that she had almost turned herself into ice and that it would help her heal. Tia thought that she didn't know that this was something that master got in exchange for his life, and she was to blame for his death. The fire mage laughed and shouted that they could all die. He turned around. Tia stood with her palms outstretched, shrouded in purple energy. Her eyes glowed purple, and she shouted, "Endless frost." The magician exclaimed that she was a little princess who was trying to learn forbidden arts in secret. Tia said that remembering her made it easier. The main character frowned and thought that they finally got to this part of the story, and he also needed to prepare quickly. Rays of purple energy radiated upward from Princess Tia. The mage exclaimed that these were gestures for the Endless Frost spell. Princess Tia's hands were folded in a triangle shape and wrapped in purple energy. The mage asked if it meant who he was. He shouted that she should know that she wouldn't be able to freeze him even if using Endless Frost. He asked her if she was going to use this trick. Tia said, "Absolute zero." Zhu Yingsu looked at her with a frown and thought that this was the ultimate skill that he had given her. He thought that it was an ice spell that the master of the ice god and the fire god, the black-robed grandmaster, came up with. He thought what made this spell different from the others was that it wasn't complicated or difficult to understand, unlike the other high-level spells. This is something that even a beginner can master, because Absolute Zero is a self-sacrifice spell that uses the caster's soul to freeze everything around them, in exchange for the caster also being frozen and sealed. The main character thought that he could not allow this to happen. He asked Dollar if he was ready. The dust cloud cleared. Dollar said he did as he said. The mage exclaimed in surprise that they should have died and it was impossible. Dollar and the soldiers stand erect. Dollar thought that even though he didn't want to admit it, he was glad that Su Yingsu was here, otherwise they would have died. He remembered entering the passage to the 3rd floor. A voice called out to move forward and that they were entering the 3rd floor. Su Yingsu called out to Dollar. He handed over a paper with a magic seal and said to give this spell to his team of mages. Looking at the paper, Dollar asked what the spell was and how a swordsman like him would know anything about spells. The main character replied that on the next floor, the boss will be a great wizard using fire. Dollar asked how he knew that. The main character said that this spell will absorb the enemy's fire magic, but if you use it directly, he will definitely understand. He said that they should use a defensive spell first. Tia, wrapped in purple energy, said, "Endless Frost." Absolute Zero. A huge beam of purple magic shot out at the mage. The mage shouted as he released fire from his hand, Hellfire Precept. Streams of purple and fire magic collided. He shouted while cursing at the ice god's followers that even though he had already been turned into a skeleton, they were still going to stand up to him. Tia said that this is the reason why all this is happening, and he is still trying to avoid responsibility for it. Her face was covered in ice. Su Yingsu called out to Dollar. Looking at the red stone in his hand, Dollar said that they really did succeed, and it's a large fire core that they were able to make from the fire magic that they just absorbed. He swung it and threw it to the main character. Su Yingsu caught it with his hand. He approached Princess Tia, apologizing for anything that concerned her, and said that if she wore this fireball, the Absolute Zero spell wouldn't freeze her. She asked where he got it from. He told her to focus on the battle in front of her eyes and they could talk about everything else later. Blushing slightly, she agreed. The fireball on her neck glowed red. The mage, noticing the power of the fire core, cursed and asked how dare they use his own power against him. A bright flash of purple magic flashed. Ella happily exclaimed that the fire god's fire had become smaller. Dollar said that he asked him to generously share his fire magic. Frowning, the protagonist wondered if things would go smoothly. He thought that the fire god must have regained some ability that he had originally carved, and why it wasn't showing up. Princess Tia's purple magic continued to press against the fire god's fire magic. Sam swore. Dollar shouted happily to kill him. Princess Tia's evil eyes glowed purple. Gritting his teeth, Su Yingsu wondered why he felt so anxious. Frowning, he thought that he had forgotten after becoming a part of this world that this was the world of Manhwa, and he wouldn't let the main characters overcome their trials so easily. He thought about how much power he would get from the original design. They were flying on the bone dragon, shrouded in purple energy. Sam called Little Chirpy to help him. A huge monster appeared in front of them. Su Yingsu asked in surprise why he had restored this particular one. When the fire god was young, he accidentally found a magic egg. He carefully controlled the temperature and successfully raised it. When the monster was born, it chirped all the time, and so the fire god decided to name it Little Chirpy. The ice god found out about him since he was a class leader at the time, and the fire god begged to keep it a secret, but the ice god was very stubborn and strict and eventually reported it to the Grand Master. The Grand Master ordered the fire god to release Little Chirpy back into the wild so that he could live on his own. The fire god knew that without his parents' protection, Little Chirpy wouldn't survive for long, but it was better than killing him with his own hands. Students of the Magic Academy are only allowed to go outside for half a day a week. The fire god was standing in the forest, calling out to Little Chirpy. He used this time to bring food for him. The fire god exclaimed his name in surprise. He saw Little Chirpy lying on the ground. Every time, he thought that the meeting might be the last, and it all resulted in hatred towards the ice god, because he knows that the reason why the ice god complained about him was not only because he was the class leader, but also because of his envy towards the fire god. During his youth, the ice god was the best student, and the master paid him the most attention. He was like a son to him, and this made him live very cautiously, because even the slightest mistake gave rise to a lot of rumors. On the other hand, ignorant people like the fire god could afford to make mistakes without thinking about the consequences. The insulator, the fire god shows Little Chirpy a flame over his hand. In the ice god's opinion, the one who was really locked up was himself. He envied the fire god for having something Dylan had never had before, freedom. In the end, the fire god swore that he would destroy what the fire god valued most. After portraying this backstory in the original comic, the main character was severely scolded by his boss. The boss irritably asks what it is while looking at Manhwa on the phone screen. He asked if the ice god wasn't the main female character's teacher and why he was acting like a villain when he was young. He asked why the fire god had turned into a sacrifice. Su Yingsu replied that even if they are on the good side, they can't only do good deeds, and even the antagonists need a reason to become evil. He asked if he didn't like it. The boss shouted that readers only want to see a cool main character destroying monsters. He asked who would want to read a comic book where the hero and the villain are indistinguishable. Pointing at him with his index finger, the boss offered him two options: either remove the entire arch or make the ice god suffer. The main character thought that readers don't want to see only a cool main character. He agreed. He thought that removing it might make Manhwa boring, but at least it was better than making the story completely unrecognizable. He thought that at that time he had hoped that readers would be able to see the full picture of his story, but he didn't want to end more. Zhu Yingsu screamed. Little Chirpy jumped towards them from the lava. The main character shouted at the bone dragon to dodge faster. Little Chirpy closed his jaws, but they dodged. There was an explosion next to the fire god, and he fell to the ground. As he rose, surrounded by a cloud of dust, he said that he had almost turned to ice. Fiery energy was gathering in Little Chirpy's mouth. Frowning, the protagonist thought that in his adult form, Little Chirpy had the power equivalent to an underground king. The bow of energy grazed the bone dragon's wing. The main character and Tia started to fall from the dragon's back. The fire god, looking towards the falling dragon, shouted not to approach it. The dragon fell to the ground, sending up a cloud of dust. The main character and Tia were standing on the ground, leaning on their hands. The fire god held out a hand wrapped in fire and said to die. Tia, wrapped in purple energy, said that she would definitely freeze at this time. Little Chirpy appeared in front of the soldiers, growling loudly. Dollar gave the order to prepare for the attack. Looking around, Zhu Yingsu asked to wait and stop. Little Chirpy loomed over the soldiers, and the protagonist shouted for everyone to stop. Gritting his teeth, he thought that even if it was real, even if it was Manhwa, changing any historical event would cause something called the butterfly effect. Due to the boss interference, Little Chirpy was cut out of Manhwa, and the fire god became a simple full-fledged villain and used Tia to kill the ice god. However, since Little Chirpy survived, it means that the personalities of the ice god and the fire god are different from those in the original version of Manhwa. In this version, the evil fire god was once a young man with innocence and empathy in his heart. The appearance of Little Chirpy here means that the fire god is not completely evil yet, and there is a chance to completely turn the situation around. The main character asked Princess Tia to stop the attack. Turning around in surprise, she asked why she should stop if she was the only one here who could stop him. Sam wondered what he was trying to do. Zhu Yingsu said that he wanted to ask some questions. He asked her if the ice god had ever said anything to her about his regrets. Sam thought irritably that they were talking again. Tia frowned and asked why he was asking her that. He asked her to just answer him honestly. She said there was one incident. Tia once secretly raised a baby monster as a pet, and Master found out about it. He got angry and took her pet away, upsetting her. Because of this, Tia decided to try to break into his office to steal it back. But by chance, she saw the master happily feeding her pet. The ice god asks the monster if it tastes good. Tia ran inside, shouting that he had double standards. The ice god was very scared. Sam laughed and asked what happened next. The ice god said he would explain everything. Tia glared at him. He said that when he was a student, he didn't let his classmate keep his pet out of envy, and because of him, that monster almost got killed. He said that the monster was eventually released into the wild. Dylan said that this classmate could only feed the pet once a week, as long as he, as a prefect, had more opportunities to go outside the school. Out of guilt, he secretly protected the pet so that it wouldn't die from the clutches of other monsters. Little Chirpy stands surrounded by monsters encased in ice. The ice god said that it seemed like this was how he was trying to redeem himself. He said that he would return the pet to her after playing with it for a while. The main character grinned and said that he understood. He thought that this part of the story wasn't written by him, but was based on the personalities and characteristics of the characters in it, and it was something that was created naturally. He thought that the ice god was never a villain, and the mistake he made was just his mistake, and even though he didn't write his story, he was still ashamed of his actions and tried to correct himself. Frowning, Zhu Yingsu thought that a good story tells the character's personality, not what the author or boss wants to see. He thought that forcing a character to do or say something out of character would only make him look like a doll. Sam asked if they were saying that Little Chirpy only survived in the wild because the ice god secretly protected him. Frowning, Tia asked if he was the classmate he was talking about. Glancing at Little Chirpy, she realized that the pet from the story was him. Sam thought that the girl didn't even know that the ice god was talking about him, so she probably wasn't lying about the story. He asked why he was hiding it, because if he knew about all this, he wouldn't have hated him all these years. The main character said that he, as his old classmate, should know the reason. Sam agreed and said he didn't say or do anything directly and clearly. Tia asked what would happen now and if they would fight. Zhu Yingsu said that it would be decided by the fire god. Sam said that he didn't want to fight anymore, and if they wanted to go any further, he let them pass because they would still die at the hands of the Skeleton King. Dollar wondered how it had all come to this. Ella asked if he should be happy that they were winning without fighting. Glancing at Little Chirpy, she said that otherwise they would have engaged in an impossible battle with this monster. Tia asked if they needed to get something from the boss of each floor, otherwise they wouldn't be able to defeat the Skeleton King. The main character agreed and said that they had already received the necessary things. The fire core on Princess Tia's chest glowed red. A black passage opened up in front of them. They asked about the fact that this door is black. Sam said that the Skeleton King represents death, so it's black. He said that since no one would be able to retreat, they should enter faster. Sam channeled the fire energy from his hand into the fire core on Princess Tia's neck. He said that he had invested 50% of his primordial fire core into it. He said that as long as he was alive, the flame of this fire core wouldn't be extinguished. Tia asked why he was doing this. Turning away, he said that he didn't want to be indebted to the ice god for protecting little Chirpy. He told them to go and added that their luck would decide whether they would return to the surface or remain here as another member of the skeleton army. The main character agreed. The passage in the cave glowed with purple lightning. In front of the main characters was a large staircase to the top. Dollar noticed that thunder was rumbling underground. Zhu Yingsu thought it was very cool, so he drew it. They go up the stairs. Ella said it was empty and there wasn't a single skeleton in sight. The main character thought that the Skeleton King knew that the soldiers who reach this level, they will not stop. He thought that if Maliati was the lord of the world, then the Skeleton King was the lord of the region and it was impossible to defeat him without training. They climbed up the stairs. In front of them was a pillared building surrounded by soldiers lying on the ground. One of them asked Princess Tia why they were here. Frowning, he shouted for them to run. Tia said they were already here and there was no way out. She asked him where Prince Luozi was. He said he was in that building. The pillared building was shrouded in purple lightning. Prince Luozi is on his knees with a sword in his hand. Frowning, he breathes wearily. The Skeleton King praised him for holding up well. He said that no one had ever been able to last as long as he did before. The Skeleton King narrowed his eyes and said that he was burning with impatience, because the stronger he was, the more powerful the skeleton warrior would turn out from his corpse. He held out a bone hand wrapped in a green aura and said that it didn't matter how strong his last strike was. Frowning, Luozi thought he was attacking. The Skeleton King shouted, "Storm of Death." Black and green energy shot out from his hands. Luozi shouted, "Motionless Mountain." A blue magic barrier appeared in front of him. He thought with a frown that life was like a candle burning, and when it went out, it was the end. Luozi thought that the death storm that the Skeleton King used was like extinguishing a candle and would kill the enemy in an instant. The magic barrier in front of him cracked, and he thought that he originally wanted to resist, wait for his magic power to run out, and then fight him in close combat. He thought that she was like a lake that would never run dry. The magic barrier in front of him was covered in cracks. Luozi thought that this was the end, and he should accept it. His eyes widened in surprise. Tia and Zhu Yingsu were standing in front of him, shielding him from the attack with a huge shield. When he saw Tia, he asked if it was a dream. Turning around, Tia told him that he was awake. 2 minutes ago. Tia frowned and said that Prince Luozi needed help as soon as possible. The main character shouted out to wait and said that the Skeleton King had a skill, Storm of Death, and if they weren't careful, they would turn to dust in a split second. Tia asked them how to protect themselves. He replied that now that they had the fire spirit, it was possible to melt the skeleton general's shield. Tia, looking at the main character behind the shield, thought that he was right, and if they didn't collect items from the bosses, then no matter how strong they were, they wouldn't be able to defeat him. Seeing the reinforcements and grinning, the Skeleton King said how good he was. Luozi frowned and asked why her father had sent her to help. Tia said that a lot of things had happened and there was no time for that right now. Luozi said that she had come too late, and he was no longer able to fight. She replied that he could rest and they would defeat the Skeleton King themselves. Luozi asked who was standing next to her. Zhu Yingsu replied with a frown that the king had instructed him to protect the princess. The Skeleton King said that now that the Storm of Death was useless, it was time for action. He charged. The Skeleton King was grinning maliciously. Noticing that he was missing, Tia asked if he was on top. Turning around, the main character exclaimed that he was behind. He said that his target was Luozi. Luozi was kneeling on the floor. A cloud of darkness appeared behind him. The Skeleton King told him to become his servant. He held out a bone hand that was shrouded in black-green energy. Luozi gritted his teeth, and the veins on his face bulged. Tia called out to him, frowning in surprise. Pushing off from the ground, the main character rushed forward. He swung his sword at the Skeleton King. The Skeleton King grinned and said that it was useless and he couldn't hurt him with a sword. Hitting it, the main character found himself at the Skeleton King's back. As he turned, he noticed the dragon's horn. The main character turned to him. There was a flash of fire. The Skeleton King was shrouded in flames. The fire spirit on Princess Tia's neck glowed. The Skeleton King asked who he was. Luozi asked Princess Tia how she was able to use fire magic. He said that they seemed to know how to fight the Skeleton King. He asked how they knew that. Tia replied with a frown that she didn't understand either, and Zhu Yingsu told her all the details. She added that she didn't think he was their enemy, but it was still strange. The main character thought that they had too many questions, which meant that it was time to reveal their identity in order to gain the trust of Princess Tia and Luozi. He said that he is the hero of this era who will defeat the Demon King. Tia's eyes widened in surprise. The Skeleton King narrowed his eyes. Luozi shouted, "Demon King." The Skeleton King laughed and said that he hadn't heard of the hero and Demon King in over 1,000 years. Narrowing his eyes, he asked if he understood what would happen if he said such a thing in front of him. Frowning, Zhu Yingsu thought that he understood because he had made it up himself. He thought that the Skeleton King was originally supposed to be the Demon King. 1,000 years ago, he was just a small town guy. At that time, there was only one country in the world, the Kingdom of Pant. However, there was a civil war going on in it, which made the lives of ordinary people a living hell. He wanted to revive his dead relatives, and for that, he worked hard to find the undead magic stone. But, in order to obtain this power, he himself had to turn into a skeleton, lose his identity, and also constantly endure incredible pain. In the end, he managed to resurrect his family, but they did not accept him. They thought it was a monster pretending to be their relative, and it was the one who cursed them. But the saddest thing was that he couldn't even cry. The Skeleton King laughed loudly, surrounded by purple lightning. He swore to take revenge on the Pant Kingdom, which caused him to plunge into the abyss itself. However, he met the hero of that era and was defeated. But he had an undead magic stone that prevented him from being killed by the hero's sword. There was a full moon in the sky. On the ground were the bones of the Skeleton King. Over the course of 1,000 years, he had recovered from the injuries he received in the Valley of Skulls and gradually gathered his own army of skeletons. However, he discovered that time doesn't spare anyone, whether you're a hero or the devil himself. Even the Pant Kingdom has disappeared, and the Skeleton King is just aimlessly taking revenge on this world. The Skeleton King said that, according to legend, the generation of heroes is different people, but there is an invisible connection between them, and in the process of growing up, they learn the legacy of heroes of the past. He said that even though it was their first time facing an enemy, they could still analyze and defeat them in battle, and that was the secret of all heroes. He said that they are getting stronger with each generation. The Skeleton King had said that no one alive should know how to fight him, which meant that Zhu Yingsu wasn't lying. Tia looked down, wondering if that was why he knew all this. Luozi wondered if being a hero was a blessing or a curse. The Skeleton King had said that a real hero didn't need to use an external force like the dragon's horn to deal with him, and Zhu Yingsu was still just an incompetent man. His eye glowed purple and he said that he would destroy it here and now so that it would not have time to reach its full potential. Getting into a fighting stance, the main character told him to try it. The Skeleton King leaped forward. He ended up behind the main character, who was standing there with a surprised face. Turning around, he slammed the dragon horn in front of him. Noticing that it had turned into smoke, Zhu Yingsu thought that it was very troublesome. The Skeleton King narrowed his eyes and asked if he thought only heroes had legacies. He was standing behind the main character. The Demon King, floating in the air while being enveloped in purple energy, laughed. In front of the main characters were 3 Skeleton Kings, yellow, purple, and green. Gritting his teeth, Zhu Yingsu thought that the Skeleton King also had the elements removed. He remembered drawing several versions of the Skeleton King. He realized that these were not deleted items, but a draft. The main character opened his eyes in surprise and noticed that not only deleted parts were being restored, but also outdated drawings. The 3 Skeleton Kings flew in different directions. Zhu Yingsu thought that the images from the drafts had become the Skeleton Kings. Luozi defended with his sword against the purple Skeleton King. The main character thought that now there were 3 Skeleton Kings against them. Tia defends herself from the green Skeleton King with a purple magic barrier. The yellow Skeleton King charged at the main character. His eye glowed yellow. He held out a hand that glowed yellow. The protagonist leaned forward and straightened up, swinging the dragon's horn. The darkness around the Skeleton King that was shrouded in blue energy dissipated. The main character called out to Tia. She shot a stream of flame at the yellow Skeleton King. The Skeleton King lost his balance in the torrent of fire. The green Skeleton King charged at Tia. A few swings of the sword sliced through the Skeleton King. Luozi stood in a cloud of dust, breathing heavily. The purple Skeleton King appeared on his back and said that he had finally used up all his strength. Luozi's eyes widened in surprise. The Skeleton King held out a bone arm that was shrouded in purple energy. Tia called out to Luozi. The Luozi standing in front of the Skeleton King suddenly disappeared. The Skeleton King looked surprised. Zhu Yingsu thought about the author's disappearing skill. Luozi swung his sword. The flow of blue energy from his sword cut the Skeleton King in half. He asked how this was possible since he had used these skills to fight him before. The Skeleton King's arm was sticking out of the darkness. A purple flash flashed. Dark energy passed through the main character. The Skeleton King looks at the dust cloud. It dissipated, and the main character was standing in it. The Skeleton King asked what was going on. Zhu Yingsu thought with a smirk that he had used invulnerability and was glad that he had accumulated a few likes from readers. There were 3 Skeleton Kings floating in the sky in front of the main characters, and the purple Skeleton King said that they were stronger than he thought. The Skeleton Kings touched each other with their hands, and he said that they were using unification. In front of them was a huge Skeleton King with glowing yellow eyes. The main character thought that now they have only one option and gave the command to act. Yellow energy gathered in the Skeleton King's mouth, and he said, "Death Ray." A red magic ray shot out at the main character. There was an explosion. The main characters are standing behind the shield of the Skeleton General. The shield began to crack, and the protagonist realized that he could not stand it anymore. The Skeleton King's face was shrouded in a bright light. In the dispersing cloud of dust, the main characters were standing in front of him. Luozi frowned and thought that he didn't expect this world to have such a terrifying monster. Tia wondered if they could beat him. Zhu Yingsu gritted his teeth and thought that if he repeated this strike, they would all die. The main characters are standing in front of a huge Skeleton King. Zhu Yingsu gritted his teeth and said that the Skeleton General's shield was broken and the United Skeleton King was too strong. The Skeleton King slammed his hand on the floor, breaking it and scattering the main characters to the sides. Jumping away from the blow, the main character thought that he wasn't used to fighting giant monsters yet. Dollar and Ella entered the room, and Dollar called out that they had come to help them. The main character shouted to them that he was telling them that the fewer people the better. Ella thought furiously that they had the same rank, but he was always bossing them around. Dollar thought furiously that he wanted to punch him in the face. The main character opened his eyes wide and shouted that they might still be able to save Luozi. Dollar ordered the mages to use a recovery spell on Luozi. The mages held out their staffs, shrouded in blue energy. A stream of blue magic shot out at Luozi. The magic entered his chest, and he looked up. The Skeleton King asked what they were up to. He slapped his hand on the glowing blue energy Luozi. Shrouded in flames, Tia held out her hand and fiercely told him to get behind her brother. Fire magic exploded against the Skeleton King. The main character ran forward. Kicking off from the ground, he leapt at the Skeleton King, swinging the dragon horn. He shouted, "Dragon Horn Strike." He swung the dragon's horn, shooting out a wave of blue energy. It struck the ground, scattering the darkness around the Skeleton King. Tia shouted that the black smoke had cleared. Luozi stood with his eyes closed, frowning. His eyes snapped open, glowing blue. Zhu Yingsu thought that Luozi was one of the most powerful characters in his manhwa apart from the protagonist. He recalled Luozi kneeling before the Skeleton King. He thought that he couldn't defeat the Skeleton King before because of its strength, even though he had come all the way from the bottom. But he didn't know what would happen to Luozi in the end, so he collected everything needed to defeat the Skeleton King, the weapons of each boss. But now everything is different. Luozi stood in front of the Skeleton King, wrapped in a blue aura. He said, "Finally." He swung his sword, striking out with a wave of blue energy. The energy hit the Skeleton King's head, and its skull flew off its neck. The main character and Tia were looking at the Skeleton King's head flying in the air. Zhu Yingsu frowned and told her to cast a true flame on the dragon's horn. Tia agreed and directed the flame from her hand at the dragon's horn. Swinging the dragon horn shrouded in flames, the protagonist shouted, "Final strike." A table of fire shot out at the Skeleton King's head. She was incinerated in a torrent of flames. Frowning, Tia asked if they were able to defeat the Skeleton King. A purple rock fell to the ground. She asked what they would do with the undead magic stone. Zhu Yingsu shouted, "Don't touch it, because anyone who touches it will turn into a skeleton." Luozi asked him what he was suggesting. He replied that he had one candidate in mind. Valley was standing in front of him. Valley looked at him in surprise. The entrance to the cave is in the shape of a skull. Coming out of the cave, the main character thought that everything was finally over. Tia told him that he had performed well in this battle and invited him to return with her to the palace to meet the king. He agreed and thought that everything was going just fine. The dialogue box says, "Congratulations on completing the Canyon of Skulls chapter." The main character thought that they had not seen the system for a long time. The dialogue box says, "The final rating will be calculated soon, please wait." Zhu Yingsu thought that he almost forgot about it. He thought that the rating had always been 5, but now something might change. The dialogue box says, "Rating 4.9. The main character frowned in surprise, noticing that he was still below average, and despite all his efforts, the plot was still too boring. A lot of red warning signs appeared in front of him, and the dialogue box says, "Rating does not meet the requirements, the world of the comic book is destroyed." The main character thought that he was a mediocre author who couldn't even protect his manhwa, himself, and the manhwa characters. The world in front of him began to shatter. He walks forward on the cracked ground. The ground beneath him shattered, and he fell screaming into the white abyss. He wondered if there was no way out, and this was the end of it. As he fell down, he thought that he didn't know how to draw interesting manhwa. The dialogue box says that due to a low rating, manhwa is finished. Manhwa statistics are crossed out with red crosses.